Next, a House Energy Subcommittee on security at nuclear facilities around the country with National Nuclear Security Administration Administrator Linton Brooks. This is chaired by Republican Edward Whitfield of Kentucky. It's about 3 hours.
Good morning, and I want to welcome everyone to this hearing today on the review of security initiatives at DOE nuclear facilities. We appreciate your being here. The subcommittee will focus on several security matters at the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons laboratories, weapons production facilities, storage facilities, and environmental cleanup sites. The protection of nuclear facilities and weapons secrets are a priority for us and has been the subject of several subcommittee hearings over the years. The Department has made several significant changes to its security policy in the year since the subcommittee's May 2004 hearing. For instance, last November, the Department made supplemental revisions to the Design Basis Threat, or DBT, that it had previously finalized in May 2003. The supplemental revisions to the DBT in October 2004 have significantly upgraded the characteristics of the postulated adversary. Consequently, additional security requirements will be necessary at each site. These changes came about in response to extensive interagency discussions regarding the potential size and nature of the terrorists that may seek to attack a domestic nuclear facility. I welcome these additional changes, but I really would like to know how quickly each DOE and NNSA site will comply with these extensive new requirements. These upgrades will be expensive, and they could take years to implement. In the past, the conventional management response to increased security requirements was to hire a larger guard force. I am encouraged that the Department may consider a greater use of available security technologies that could increase security and reduce the cost of security management at each site. At our May 2004 hearing, then Deputy Secretary Kyle McSlarrow presented the subcommittee with a series of new security initiatives. Several of these proposals have already been completed or are under development, while some initiatives have not started. Mr. Glenn Podolsky, Director of Security and Safety Performance Assessment, will present testimony regarding the status of these initiatives. I am particularly interested in the Department's efforts to consolidate nuclear materials across the complex, increase the use of new security technologies, and enhance protections to classified computer information. I would also note that Mr. Podolsky has been to my district on several occasions in the past few years to review safety matters in Paducah, at the Paducah site, and I welcome you here today. Today we will also hear from Ambassador Linton Brooks, Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration. Administrator Brooks has responsibility for the weapons laboratories, including Los Alamos National Laboratory. Ongoing safety and security problems at Los Alamos are a serious concern for the committee. We've had numerous hearings on security, safety, and business management problems at Los Alamos. We hope the Administrator Brooks and Lab Director Pete Nanos, who will also testify today, can explain how we can turn the tide on the bad news at Los Alamos. This is the first of what I hope will be several hearings on the status of security at DOE nuclear facilities. Protection of nuclear materials within our borders is a critical line of defense against terrorists. In the future, I plan to focus on DOE and NRC's efforts to secure a seal source or seal sources scattered across the country. These are radioactive materials found in a range of industrial equipment, including medical device and devices used to gauge oil wells. After today's third panel, we plan to move the hearing to a secure room where we can continue to discuss security matters in closed session with Administrator Brooks, Mr. Podolsky, and Director Nanos. We look forward to your testimony today, and thank you once again for being here. And at this time, Mr. Stupak is recognized for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing. Today's hearing will be yet another glimpse by this committee into the myriad of issues surrounding the security status of DOE's weapons complex. I'm very pleased to report that considerable progress has been made over the past 5 years. I remain concerned that a range of issues still require attention by this committee, the Department of Energy, and the National Nuclear Security Administration. These matters, which I intend to delve into in closed session, will be the mainstay of this hearing. I look forward to exploring with our witnesses why it is that we still haven't addressed certain known deficiencies at key sites, and when can we expect some conclusions on these matters. Mr. Chairman, as you know, there are a number of sites in this complex that receive very formidable protection. While I fully agree that additional progress must be made to ensure that the DOE sites meet the new design-based threat requirements, I intend to ask our witnesses to explain in detail where gaps remain. For example, we will need to clearly articulate a list of top priorities needing attention and then offer a detailed explanation on what must occur to bring finality to these matters. Many of the problems that we've discussed today are the very same concerns that have plagued the complex for nearly a decade. So let me pose to both Mr. Brooks and Mr. Podolsky that you both succinctly tell us what it is what is still vulnerable and why, what needs to be done to rectify any such vulnerabilities, and provide this committee with key dates on when it will get done. During the course of this hearing, I'm sure that a number of key facilities and their security status will be discussed. I'm also expecting that this committee will continue to examine this area and assess the ongoing progress throughout the next 18 months, as you've indicated, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd urge that both of us personally visit a variety of these facilities as soon as possible. I'd like to personally visit those sites where considerable progress has been made and those sites where there's considerable work going on. I would ask that Mr. Brooks work with us to set up such a field visits in the near future. If there's good news in today's discussion, it is the fact that DOE complex, as compared to other potential targets across the United States, have considerably improved and are hardened. Of course, more can and should be done, and I'll work with all the parties to ensure that forward progress is made. Nonetheless, as you know, over the course of the past 3 years, this committee has worked incredibly hard to address a range of other issues related to Homeland Security, specifically on the nuclear materials proliferation and smuggling fronts. It is my opinion that this Congress must be far more aggressive in addressing the many roles that DOE, Department of Homeland Security, and NSA are playing in that arena. Specifically, I'm interested in all aspects of how these agencies are securing the many sources of material throughout the globe, and the myriad of issues surrounding the identification and interdiction should such material fall into the wrong hands. Mr. Chairman, this committee has already expended considerable time and effort on some of these matters, including spending considerable resources examining the roles of DOE plays in setting up detection technology in foreign ports. In fact, as part of our effort, staff from this committee has visited almost 30 ports and border crossings to assess what kinds of equipments are being installed domestically, to make sure that there is no smuggled nuclear materials, and to assess what roles the national labs and DOE are playing in assisting the Department of Homeland Security in this capacity. It is my understanding that we will continue to work, and I sincerely believe it is among the most important matters being addressed by this committee. Finally, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that this committee will continue to examine these matters and that we will soon hold additional hearings on these topics. I applaud the effort, and I will continue to lend my full support to this effort. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I do have one housekeeping matter I'd like to discuss. I note that Mr. Nanos from Los Alamos will be testifying today. I have a great deal of respect for your work, Mr. Nanos, and I look forward to your testimony. In particular, I'm looking forward to hearing about how Los Alamos is progressing since the major events of last year. Nonetheless, I do have document that I hope you will be able to shed some light on. This is the white paper which characterizes an audit by Mr. Don Brown, and I know that you're familiar with this audit. Mr. Brown was apparently an auditor at that facility with considerable quality assurance, quality control expertise. Mr. Brown conducted a series of audits at Los Alamos, and according to this document, major issues involving quality control and quality assurance were found and may continue to plague the facility. This document appears to have been created by an individual who I'm guessing had at least some standing at Los Alamos complex, at least enough to be allowed to do these kinds of audits. I think we need more information on this matter, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to indulge your help in seeking some clarity about this audit, and would also request that Mr. Nanos provide in writing a point-by-point response to each of the concerns laid out in this document. I presume this would not be too burdensome. While this may not be directly related to the site security per se, I nonetheless believe that if the matters are true and they involve quality assurance and quality control issues, then those could indeed seriously affect how this lab is run and ultimately impinge upon both safety and security. Mr. Nanos, I'm hoping that you'll be able to provide the information to us and resolve this matter quickly. Let me conclude by again thanking you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing. I would greatly like to thank our witnesses, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Podolsky, are certainly key players in this arena, and both have been very supportive of this committee's work. As a new ranking member of the subcommittee, I am indeed looking forward to working with you both over the course of this Congress. I would also, again, like to welcome Mr. Nanos from Los Alamos. As you know, while we do not always agree with some of the decisions made at your facility, I nonetheless look forward to working with you, and I appreciate the extreme hard work that you and your colleagues have put forth in the mission of protecting the United States and the efforts of trying to get the facility back on track after events of the last few years. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Ms. Bryan from the Project on Government Oversight. Ms. Bryan's organization has been a continuous source of information about what corrections are needed at the DOE complex. As always, we're pleased to be provided with her expertise and that of her organization, and I want to thank her for being here. Mr. Chairman, thank you again, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Stupak. And without objection, the document that you would refer to will be made a part of the record, and we will ask that Mr. Nanos respond to those questions as you had asked, and we look forward to his response on that. At this time, I'll recognize Dr. Burgess for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling the hearing. I'll waive the opening statement. I have one I'll put in the record, but in the interest of time and hearing from the witnesses, we'll just submit that for the record.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll recognize Mr. Inslee for his opening statement.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the chair for his continued interest in this, because trust of the public is really paramount here, and we've got some work to do to get to the level we need. Thank you.
I would also note that all members will have 30 days to submit their opening statements for the record, and the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Barton, was not able to be with us today, but did want me to emphasize his interest in this subject matter, and that he will be submitting his opening statement as well. At this time, I will recognize the witnesses. Our first panel includes, as I've already indicated, the Honorable Linton Brooks, who is Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration, and Mr. Glenn Podolsky, who is the Director of the Office of Security and Safety Performance Assurance at the United States Department of Energy. As you know, is the custom with our Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, we ask that the witnesses be testify under oath, and also that you have a right to counsel if you wish to do that. So I would ask both of you, are you willing to testify under oath this morning? And do either one of you prefer to have counsel with you? Okay, then if you will rise, just repeat after me. I solemnly swear to, do you solemnly swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You're now sworn in, and at this time I would call on Mr. Brooks for your opening statement. Would you put your mic on?
I'm sorry. So seldom I need amplification. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of your ranking member. I would very much like to have members of this committee visit our facilities. They're large, they're complex, and it's a case where a visit is worth a 1,000 words. I'd also be happy in the question period to answer questions on the broader subject of materials, and would also be willing to do that at a later date. I want to cover three areas, and I'm abbreviating, with your permission, my formal statement. I want to talk about what we've done to improve physical security, to improve classified material security, and to improve federal supervision of our contractors. My basic message is simple. While we still need to improve, none of the security assets entrusted to NNSA are at risk, and our security program is robust and effective. Physical security has been focused on the need to respond to the increased threat that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, in your opening statement. In May of 2003, Secretary approved a design basis threat that increased the number and sophistication of attackers. We are scheduled to meet the Department's requirements to be fully compliant by the end of fiscal year 2006. In May of last year, we undertook a review of threat intelligence, and we made further changes for still further enhancements, and we'll meet this new standard by the end of fiscal year 2008. We'll be happy to discuss in closed session the intelligence that led us to those changes and what the changes are and the degree to which the difficulty we will or won't have in meeting them. In general, what we've done is first increase the number of uniformed protective forces and improve their weaponry. We've added barriers, we've closed roads, we've increased security patrols, we've increased access controls, and we've enhanced employee awareness of threats. Now, our near-term solution relied on the application of more guards and more guns, and that's costly measures that we can't afford to imply indefinitely. So we're also focusing on consolidation of special nuclear material, primarily right now within sites, but ultimately by eliminating material at sites, and on the increased use of technology. At the Y-12 plant, construction of a highly enriched uranium material facility has begun and is scheduled for completion in April of 2008. That'll let us consolidate all the special nuclear material in an exceptionally secure facility. It will be ultimately matched with a processing facility that will be within the same security perimeter and connected by underground passageways, so it's an effective single site. In the interim, the site has done some innovative efforts to use containers to form de facto forts in order to slow the potential path of an attacker. At Los Alamos, we've removed nuclear material from 5 facilities since 2001. We are moving material from Technical Area 18 to a facility at the Nevada test site. Technical Area 18 will be empty of Category 1 and 2 special nuclear material by later this year. At Sandia National Lab, we will shut down the Sandia Pulse Reactor in 2007, and that will end operations with special nuclear materials at Sandia. Over the longer term, we have charged a congressionally mandated weapons complex review with looking at how we might end plutonium operations at Livermore while maintaining their capability to participate in stockpile stewardship. These findings will be available in late April. Now, consolidation is important, but it alone is insufficient. America's strength is technology. So we are deploying advanced concept armored vehicles. We are deploying remotely operated weapons systems. We're beginning integration of smart camera systems into security, and we're implementing new vehicle detection systems. In the longer term, we're looking at additional active denial systems, more remotely operated weapons, and more advanced detective systems. Finally, we're working with Mr. Podolsky's office to expedite the fielding of technology that we had developed in the past but not fully implemented. Now, consolidation and technology help, but security will always depend on well-trained protective forces. We're going to try and reduce the reliance on protective forces. We'll never eliminate it. Most of our protective forces are dedicated and competent, but we've had problems. 3 years ago, for example, at Sandia, we had security officers sleeping on duty, we had incidents of racial tension, and we had an unprofessional attitude. Under our direction, Sandia took major steps to improve the leadership. To make sure they were adequate, I commissioned a retired Air Force Major General to go out and personally observe the steps Sandia was taking. Based on his reports, my reports, and those of my observations, I think performance and morale at Sandia and the protective force has remarkably improved. We've also had problems with lost keys. Keys didn't allow access to classified material or special nuclear material, but their loss showed, there's a series of instances about 2 years ago, showed that security procedures needed improvement. Basically, we had too many keys, and so we are now in the process of moving to a keyless environment. At the Y-12 plant, we've reduced the number of keys by 85%. Finally, working with Mr. Bodansky, we are working toward the creation of a true elite paramilitary force among our guards. Progress is steady but uneven. For example, Mr. Bodansky discovered substandard performance by the protective force at the Nevada test site last summer. The site manager was sufficiently concerned to turn over routine operation of her site office to her deputy and take personal supervision of the recovery plan. Security of nuclear materials has to be matched by security of classified information. We've initiated efforts to reduce classified holdings at all facilities. Classified information for us is not just documents and computer disks, but also a large number of classified parts. At Y-12, we've moved 1 million pounds of classified material to long-term secure storage. In July of last year, Dr. Nanos, director of Los Alamos, imposed a stand-down on essentially all operations at the lab. He did that because of a series of safety and security problems, including an inability to locate 2 classified computer disks. 3 separate investigations have now convinced us that the missing disks never existed, but those investigations revealed significant security management problems. In essence, the problem is it took us several months to realize what had happened. I provided the committee a copy of the report the former Deputy Secretary and I prepared and a copy of the letter outlining the significant fee reduction imposed on the University of California for these decisions. As a result of these problems, the department has tightened restrictions on accountable classified material throughout the complex. We now require these items be maintained in centralized lending libraries with formal checkout procedure and full-time trained custodians. Once again, the key, however, is to reduce the amount of material. Los Alamos, for example, has reduced from over 90,000 pieces of accountable, removable electronic media to about 23,000. We are now in the process, however, of enabling further reductions by working toward a so-called diskless computing environment where classified computing doesn't depend on removable hard drives, removable zip drives. When I came to this position 3 years ago, I became concerned that I did not have enough competent federal security professionals. In March of 2003, I asked a retired Admiral, Hank Childs, to look at our approach to staffing. As a result of his work, we're trying to revitalize the federal security workforce. We're improving formal training and certification of security officials. We're about to implement an intern program to recruit for the long term, and we are improving training and management. Under the structure that I've created, supervision of contractors is carried out by federal site offices located at each of the 8 NNSA facilities. Last summer, when the investigation at Los Alamos revealed significant security problems, I became concerned because the problems came as a surprise to the site office. This was in sharp contrast to the safety problems, where the site office had, I submit, at least as good an understanding as the laboratory and probably better. Then, when we had the poor inspection in Nevada, I became concerned because the results were a surprise to the site office. I wasn't as concerned that the inspection went poorly. If inspections never go poorly, they aren't tough enough. But I was concerned that my people were surprised by the result. So I led a team of senior officials to visit each of my sites to look in depth at how we were providing our supervisory responsibility. I concluded I needed to fix 4 areas. I needed to fix leadership, I needed to fix the numbers of and training of our security experts. I needed to improve hands-on involvement, and I needed to provide more help from headquarters. I replaced 2 of the 6 senior site security officials. I had previously replaced 1 other. Some of my site managers had a tendency to think of security as somebody else's problem. I've corrected that misperception. We're working on improving training and qualification, and we're increasing the number of security professionals at the site offices. I also became concerned with the way we were providing our supervision. In safety, we get out into the facility a lot. In security, we have a tendency to review reports. So we're gradually trying to move toward a more day-to-day, hands-on approach. Finally, my only way to know my site offices were doing well was when Mr. Podonsky came every other year with a full-scale inspection. I concluded that I needed more frequent feedback, and so I'm establishing an office to assess and validate security performance and provide assistance to the site managers as a supplement to what Mr. Podonsky does. I believe that the steps we've put in place will improve our supervision of security, but I won't know that for a few more months. Mr. Chairman, we remain committed to maintaining the security of the facilities and the materials and the information we guard. I'm as confident of the security of our facilities as at any time in my tenure. I am not, however, satisfied. It's essential we continue the improvements we have underway. Only by doing so can we assure long-term security. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. And at this time, Mr. Podonsky, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing and for the invitation to testify today regarding the status of security at the Department of Energy. The story of security at the Department of Energy over the past several years is one significantly affected by change in the global security situation and in the recognized threat we face, change in the missions and configurations of our weapons complex, and change in how we approach and practice our security responsibilities. Today, I will summarize the progress made in the efforts to enhance security posture of the DOE, and I'll also discuss with the committee those areas where the efforts have fallen far short and require additional work. I've addressed these in some detail in my written testimony. The DOE has made significant but not sufficient progress in the past 3.5 years following September 11th terrorist attacks. The DOE took immediate actions to increase security. As Ambassador Brooks just said in his opening statement, we had an elevated security condition imposed. We added additional physical security measures, such as increasing protective force posts, enhancing access controls, and erecting barriers to increase standoff for vehicle bombs. And we modified some operational procedures. Follow-on actions included initiating a review of our design basis threat and creating my office to increase the effectiveness of interaction on security matters between the headquarters and the field. Last May, the DOE initiated a wide-ranging set of security initiatives to address known security problems and to begin transforming our protection systems to meet our future security needs. These initiatives are central to the current security enhancement efforts and encompass 4 broad areas. Information security initiatives involve efforts to improve our cybersecurity programs by expanding the performance testing, improving capabilities and procedures for recognizing, reporting, and disseminating and reacting to attacks on our cyber systems, as well as moving to a diskless desktop environment for classified computing. Our security technologies initiatives are aimed at addressing specific problems, such as creating keyless security environment and enhancing our protection programs through other technologies. A third set of initiatives address our need to consolidate our inventories of special nuclear materials. Our final set of initiatives involves improving our security of human capital and included a range of activities to improve recruitment, training for security professionals, as well as the development, as Ambassador Brooks just mentioned, the elite level protective force at our most sensitive facilities. These initiatives, 15 in all, represent an aggressive agenda to transform and enhance our protection programs and meet the requirements of our revised design basis threat, and to respond to emerging threats. The Department is continuing to pursue these initiatives. Some have been completed, most are progressing, some significantly more slowly than we prefer. DOE must pursue these security initiatives aggressively, especially since we have continued to experience problems with implementation of our protection programs and related management systems. For example, some local line management feedback and improvement mechanisms, such as Federal Security Survey programs and contractor self-assessment programs, have not been effective enough to detect and correct existing protection program deficiencies. This is verified by deficiencies found by our Independent Oversight Office at sites such as Hanford, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, Y-12, and Nevada TESA. These problems, which included such things as poor protective force performance, deficient nuclear material control and accountability programs, inadequate classified document control, and deficiencies in physical security systems, should have been identified and corrected by the local management before our Independent Oversight Office found them during their inspections. On a somewhat wider scale, we've experienced problems in the last year or two, as you know, with lock and key control systems and with maintaining adequate controls for classified removable electronic media, or CREM, as we've learned to call it. Again, in many cases, line management control mechanisms at individual sites did not properly detect and correct the conditions. We can expect that various problems are going to emerge from time to time in systems as large and complex as our protection programs. What's important is that we identify those problems as they are emerging and correct them before they do us harm. We depend on local DOE line management for this timely identification and correction. However, the local management, as I've stated, has not always been up to the task. The most significant security-related changes we face today and in the near future are those associated with implementing our current design basis threat. Meeting the elevated requirements of the revised DBT will require significant changes in many of our protection systems and at a significant cost. This effort is going to require the identification, procurement, and integration of new technologies into our protection systems, significant efforts to raise the skill levels of some of our protective forces and other security professionals, and a concerted effort to reduce and consolidate our special nuclear material inventories. To address the first of these efforts, we currently have a site assistance visit activity underway that is intended to apply our best technological, analytical, and tactical expertise to assist our most critical facilities in identifying security technology applications and innovative protective force strategies that will enable them to effectively and efficiently meet the requirements of the DBT. We're encouraged by the ideas resulting from these visits, but individual sites will have to follow up that effort to finalize the designs and compute the cost of their proposed protection system upgrades. Ultimately, Mr. Chairman, the Department will have to devise ways to integrate new security technologies, new protective force weapons and tactics with operational needs and safety concerns, and we will need to find the funding sources for those enhancements. We are upgrading the capabilities currently and the curricula at our National Training Center in Albuquerque, which will play a central role in elevating the skill levels of our protective force and other security professionals, as well as those managers responsible for the security and safety program implementation or oversight. Consolidating the special nuclear materials to the greatest degree practical may prove to be the most difficult challenge, because even after we identify consolidation opportunities and address the related programmatic issues such as construction of storage facilities, funding, and relocation programs, we will be faced with federal, state, and local political obstacles to relocating these materials that the Department will not be able to solve internally. In closing, we believe the Department is, in fact, actively pursuing initiatives that will improve the capabilities of the security systems. I am confident that Secretary Bodman and Ambassador Brooks are, in fact, committed to continuing these efforts. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, the Department has not always followed through on its commitments. However, it is my opinion that it's a new day with Secretary Bodman. He has made it clear he will not tolerate missed commitments and inadequate management controls, and that the Department will enact innovative and effective methods to foster the necessary changes in our security practices and cultures to counter the evolving threat. While this effort is large and is difficult, it's not impossible. With support from this committee and others in Capitol Hill, and together in cooperation with our stakeholders at every level, we can and we will succeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Podonsky, thank you very much for your opening statement. And as is the custom with oversight and investigation, we'll have 10 minutes of questions for each of the members of the panel. And I'll start off here. Administrator Brooks, since 2000, we've talked about moving Category 1 and Category 2 nuclear materials out of Technical Area 18 at Los Alamos and move it out to Nevada. And there's been all sorts of delays, but I noticed in your testimony this morning that you made the comment that you do intend to have Category 1 and 2 material out of TA-18 by the end of the year. Is that still your commitment?
That's correct. We were, before the Los Alamos stand down, we were slated to complete removal by the 30th of September. I now believe, as a result of the delays imposed by the stand down, that it'll be mid-November, about a 6-week slip. We will have half of the material in Nevada by the end of the year. That's actually slightly earlier than we expected. The rest of the material will be moved from TA-18 to another location in Los Alamos temporarily, and then will be moved to Nevada over the next couple of years. So we will have all Category 1 and 2 material out middle of November.
Okay, but out of the site
TA-18.
in a couple of years.
Out of Los Alamos in a couple of years, but out of the vulnerable site at TA-18 by mid-November.
By the end of the year.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good. Now, I would like to also just review basically the relationship between the respective offices of the two of you gentlemen. Of course, Mr. Podonsky, you work for DOE.
Yes, sir.
And you're in charge of independent oversight at all DOE and NNSA sites.
That's correct, sir.
And Ambassador Brooks, you're in charge of NNSA nuclear weapon labs and production sites, including Los Alamos.
Correct.
Now, we have this memo dated December 2nd, 2003, which was signed by former Secretary Abraham, which established the Office of Security and Safety Performance Oversight, and I asked unanimous consent to enter this document into the record. And this memo clearly authorizes Mr. Podonsky's office to continue the independent oversight of NNSA's safeguard and security, cybersecurity, environment, safety and health, and emergency management programs. Now, Mr. Brooks, you indicated in your testimony that you will create your own Office of Performance Assurance to conduct security oversight at NNSA sites. And now, have you created this office with the intention of replacing the work of Mr. Podonsky, or what was your goal?
No, not at all. And part of the problem I've had is finding the right name for this office that doesn't allow that misperception. Mr. Podonsky provides independent oversight. He provides it on behalf of the Secretary. He also provides it on behalf of me. We have an agreement that if I see a need for an outside observation, I can call on Mr. Podonsky, and I've done that from time to time. But Mr. Podonsky comes in at periodic intervals, and he is the verification to the Secretary that we're doing our job. I don't want to replace that. I need that independent oversight. What I did 2 years ago was centralize authority and responsibility in site offices. That authority and responsibility was diffused before then. And to emphasize the importance of those site offices, I didn't provide periodic supervision from headquarters. And in 2 areas, that was a mistake. Nuclear safety, where I'm unrelated to the subject of this hearing, and security. So what I want to do is provide a routine interaction between my office that the site manager can call on when they need help, and that will make sure that I know that when Mr. Podonsky comes, I don't have to wait the 2 years till his next visit to make sure that we are performing correctly. It's a difference between line supervision, which is my responsibility, and this is a tool to aid me in it, and independent oversight, which is Mr. Podonsky's. But the functions are quite separate.
Mr. Podonsky, you agree with Mr. Brooks' assessment of the situation?
I agree with how he describes it, and I certainly hope that it will be enacted that way. My experience, Mr. Chairman, is that this department does a lot of checking on itself without much improvement. I have every confidence that what Ambassador Brooks is talking about is reasonable and makes sense. If I were in Ambassador Brooks's position, I would want to know how my sites were performing before independent oversight came as well. I just want to make sure that we don't fall into the same predicament that we have had in past years. Previous secretaries have created what we call checkers checking checkers. That's not a good situation because we get a lot of reports and not a lot of action. I don't believe that's what the intention is from how Ambassador Brooks has described the program.
And I agree with that completely. One of the advantages Mr. Podonsky and I have is that we're both going to be in these jobs for the next few years, so we'll make sure this gets off.
Well, I hope that's the case because, as you said, Mr. Podonsky, we do seem to have a lot of checkers checking checkers, and we do need more action, and there's certainly been a lot of problems in these programs. Mr. Brooks, the University of California stated that the cost of the stand down at Los Alamos was around $160 million. However, we have a NNSA memorandum dated February 22nd, 2005, from the NNSA's chief financial officer in Albuquerque to the Los Alamos site manager. And according to this document, the total programmatic cost of the stand down is about $367 million. And I ask unanimous consent to enter this document into the record, and it seems that the difference between these two estimates relates to whether we include indirect costs in the estimate. Do you think this $367 million estimate from your staff represents the actual cost of the stand down?
Represents an upper limit. There are 2 points of difference, if I may. This gets into a little bit about how we account for costs with our contractors. There are 2 differences, and the application of indirect cost is actually the smaller. Here's what we do. An individual at a laboratory is working on a project, and they keep a record with a little code of what project they're working on. We then take that labor cost, add what other direct cost materials. That's the cost, the direct cost of the project. We then apply to that the things you need to run a lab, the fire department, the salary of the laboratory director, and those are indirect costs. There are 2 differences between the laboratory methodology and ours. At our direction, the laboratory kept track of the cost of the stand down, but the way it chose to do so was to continue to have people charge to their projects and to apply an algorithm that estimated the amount of time that was purely stand down. That's not auditable. It's not done with any malicious intent, but it's not auditable. What we did is we said, here's the period of the stand down, here's what they charge to their projects. So that gave us a substantially larger direct labor cost. Now, the truth is almost certainly somewhere in the middle. The laboratory assumes about $119 million of direct labor cost. We assume about $200 and some odd of direct labor cost, and there's no way to allocate between that as to what people would have been doing if there'd never been a stand down, because that's not the way the records were kept. then the laboratory chooses to say that indirect cost is inappropriate here, we believe that the way we compare costs is using indirect costs, and so that's the difference. It is an accounting difference. I believe that the assessment of Mr. Martinez, who is my field chief financial officer, is correct, but it is conservatively correct. In other words, it's an auditable accounting standard assessment of what can be documented. The actual cost, money that was spent only because of the stand down, is almost certainly less, but because there's no way to determine how much less, we do not accept the laboratory's, I would call it estimate. Dr. Nanos would probably not use that same word. The real cost of the stand down, however, is not just monetary, it's what's happened to the programs. Right. And we're working very hard with the laboratory to minimize that. But I stand by that report. That's a good report.
But the costs are significant.
The costs are significant.
Now, I noticed that my time's expired here, but I noticed that you did reduce the fees at the University of California, but do you feel like that the University of California should pay some of these costs caused by the stand down?
The determination of whether these are allowable charges to the government is a formal determination that will be made by the contracting officer. In the report you refer to, the chief field financial officer offers an opinion that the bulk of these costs are allowable charge to the government. Let me give you an analogy. If we at our lab go build something, anything, and it costs more than we expected, the government is responsible for that extra cost. We may decide to reduce the fee. We may decide to hire somebody else to run the lab, but we can't change the rules of the contract in the middle. This may be an analogous situation. Our recourse first is to reduce fee, which, as you know, I've done, and secondly, this is a performance issue which will be taken account in the upcoming competition. I believe those are likely to be our recourse, but I want to be very careful not to prejudge the independent determination of the contracting officer who's responsible for deciding whether these are allowable costs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tupac.
If I may pick up right there, so you mean like stand-down costs is not addressed at all in the contracts?
No, and that's what makes it more complex. But some of the stand-down costs can be regarded as the necessary cost of doing business. I don't want to suggest that this is a completely black and white determination, and I don't want to suggest we've made a final judgment, but I don't want to mislead the committee. Two independent looks have suggested that under the contract these are probably going to be allowable costs.
But that sounds, how do you ever change the culture then if the security, the lax security, the quality assurance then, if stand-down costs, not only do you have the loss of work being done at the lab, but then you also have other costs for the cost of the stand-down, and then you say, oh, well, that's part of doing business with the government, so the taxpayer has to flip the bill, while the university here, University of California, who oversees this, just, how do you ever get any kind of change this culture? You have to do things right, or there's going to be some responsibility, and with that responsibility, in this case, these costs should be bared by the university and not by the taxpayer.
Well, first of all, sir, I think you change the culture on the ground in the lab, and I believe that the very strong actions Dr. Nanos took to hold people accountable, including terminations and reductions, I think that the time spent in reviewing procedures and working on culture, those are going to pay off. In essence, we've spent $300+ million to make the lab better. Now, if we screw it up and the lab isn't better as a result of this, then that's been an enormous waste of time and energy, and we will not know for some period of time. In the stand down, for example, the laboratory uncovered some 350 issues that had to be corrected before they started. They uncovered another 3,000 issues of long-term improvement that are being built into a thing. If we follow through on that, we'll have...
Yeah, if you go in looking for 300, you come out with 3,000 more. What does that say about the quality of the security and the quality assurance and quality control at the lab? It says it's pretty ridiculous, to put it mildly. And then these costs are just passed back to the taxpayer. See, you're going to get 3,000. You're going to get 3,000 again when you go back there to the next stand down. I hope you don't have another one. If we're not doing anything, if we're not holding anyone responsible, I guess that's the culture I'm looking for.
Yes, sir, and I understand
the only one who's being responsible is held responsible is a U.S. taxpayer because they're paying for all these costs, direct and indirect. Aren't we paying, I mean, you know, really, aren't we paying University of California for their expertise so you don't have these stand downs, so we don't have all these costs that the taxpayers and the labs can run?
Well, we're certainly paying them to manage the lab. We're certainly unhappy with their management, which is the reason for the significant reduction in fee. The university, as you know, operates the laboratory in a way that it neither benefits nor pays. That is, the fee it receives is plowed back into the lab, and it does not go into its general area. I believe there's no question at all that the university understands that it's screwed up and that it is actively trying to make sure that the problems are really fixed.
But from where we sit, you know, this is my 10th year on this committee on oversight, and you know, I've heard this 10 years now, that we think they really understand, they really get it this time. I mean, at Los Alamos, I've been there. I mean, when I said we should go see these, I've been there because of the problems there. And I go there, and you know, they have these real strict procedures, and I think Dr. Nanos has really tried to put some strict procedures in there. But if the overseer, University of California here, isn't going to have this relaxed attitude, and there's no real cost to them because they can just put that cost back off to the taxpayer, I just think we're going to be here for another 10 years going over the same thing and hearing either yourself or someone else in your position saying, I think they really understand. I just don't see it. Well,
and the one difference, sir, I will submit is the competition. I think that for the first time, as a result
of a lot of
past problems, we've made a decision, and we're working very hard to make sure this is a genuine, not a pro forma competition. And I believe that that is having a salutary effect.
And I hope that when you do these competitive bids, you put in there, if there's a stand down, you're going to be responsible for part of the stand down because we're relying upon your expertise, so we don't have these stand downs that cost us extra money. I mean, as you use your analogy, if we're building a project there and the project costs more money than what we anticipate the government's responsible for, well, we pay for to run these labs at a certain price. If it's going to cost more because of lack of quality control, I don't think the taxpayer should have to pay that price. I think University of California should, or whoever's managing it. You know, in my opening, I mentioned I want to ask you, each of you, some areas that you feel we need to address and address now. So if you could generally do that, I don't want you to say anything classified. We'll have that discussion later. But, Mr. Podolsky, what do you think are the 3 or 4 most important issues we need to address and address them now? Is it the classified removal of electronic media, or is it the theft of nuclear material? What do you think are the top 3 or 4 things, just generally?
Generally, Congressman, it's the consolidation of the nuclear material. It needs to be addressed now and as rapidly as possible, as I said in my opening statement. It's the deployment of technology. We're in the 21st century, and we're still depending on more guards, gates, and guns than technology. And so we definitely need to do that. And as Ambassador Brooks and I also mentioned, we are moving in that direction. We're just not moving as quickly as we would prefer to move. The improvement of the existing security force. We talk about an elite force in former Secretary Abraham's initiatives. Well, we need to establish a paramilitary group for our most valuable assets and Category 1 facilities. We need to continue to improve our physical security at many of our sites, and all this is rolled up into our DBT. And lastly, I would say, Mr. Congressman, is that federal management and oversight of the sites needs to be improved. And as you've heard, Ambassador Brooks intends to do that at NNSA sites, and we need to do that also at the DOE sites.
Let me hit 2 points. You mentioned consolidation and technology improvements. Consolidation, and I was a little concerned when you said, we're going to move this stuff out of, was it TA-18 there, and it's going to go up to Nevada. And part of it's going to go, we're going to take it out of the buildings and now going to put it in another building, and then later on it'll get shifted up to Nevada. Why is that taking so long? Why don't you just move it all to Nevada? Why are we hopping from spot to spot?
I think that's better answered by the program, which would be Ambassador Brooks.
Okay. Because when you say consolidation now, I mean, what do you mean by now? Like right this year, or
When in my capacity for the Secretary and for Ambassador Brooks, looking at it independently, I don't have to worry about running the programs. So I can look at it and say, why aren't we moving the material now?
Well.
Like the Sandia Pulse reactor, without getting into classified now.
Sure.
Sure, we ought to just go ahead and terminate that activity, but clearly the program has other requirements that I'm not familiar with, and that would have to be Ambassador Brooks' decision. But it seems to me, after a number of years in this agency and overseeing it, that we just don't move rapidly enough for reasons that are not always clear. Some of them are legitimate, and some of them, separate from Ambassador Brooks, I think are just more excuses as to why we don't do what we should be doing.
Sure, TA-18, if I remember correctly, we've been talking about moving this for 10 years.
That's correct, but I would also say, and I was there in 2000 when it was first brought up with former
Right.
Secretary Richardson, at least now they're doing something about it. Back then it was still just talk.
I'm getting concerned. You guys are starting to sound like the EPA. They told me the other day soon, and that was 13 years. And we're at now, and that's 10 years. So that's sort of, government moves slowly, but shouldn't move that slowly. Mr. Brooks, or Ambassador Brooks, could you give us a little bit more on why this consolidation? Why can't we just get it up to Nevada?
A couple of reasons. One is that there's a safety reason. That is, packaging and moving special nuclear material takes time. We have a couple of shipments that have already gone. We have several shipments that are going. But the problems at Los Alamos were, in my view, much more severe in the safety than in the security area. And we're not going to do high-hazard operations other than in a safe manner. Secondly, there's a programmatic issue. This material exists in part because of some criticality training that we're going to have to ultimately replicate in Nevada. We're trying to balance the requirements to get it out of TA-18, still maintain the program, and do everything safely. And what we have come up with is to move out of TA-18 by the end of the year to an area where there's already a good deal of material and a very robust amount of security, and I can talk a little bit more about that in the closed session, while continuing to move it as rapidly as safe to Nevada. So even if I could press a button now and have it all in Nevada, I probably wouldn't want to do it. I need some of it to continue the criticality experiments that are important for our emergency management. So what I'm doing is putting it in a safer place in the interim until I can get the capability at Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Burgess, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Podolsky, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of local Department of Energy site management to identify and correct security problems on their own. However, you also point out that local management has not always been up to the task. Los Alamos has had problems with managing their classified data inventories for many years. Why do you think the Los Alamos at the site level has been unable to effectively identify and correct management weaknesses before the problems occur?
I don't think that Los Alamos has a corner on that market of not able to identify all the problems at the site. What has traditionally happened, in my experience in the department, is that the site offices have not always had the depth of capability among their federal staff to go out and do the work that, for example, that my independent oversight office does. And because of restriction on the number of people that they can afford to have at the sites in the past, I think what we term oversight, and I think oversight is a misnomer. It's really managing and directing the M&O contracts is what we need to recognize, and there needs to be more of that. I can't give you a specific, Congressman, as to why they didn't have a more robust management and direction, but we have confidence. My oversight group now has confidence in the team that Ambassador Brooks has there on site. We also have confidence, and that is not to impugn people who have served in those capacities previously, but there's various degrees of talent that the federal government is able to attract and keep, and I think Ambassador Brooks has got some of the best that he can find for the management of that site right now.
Is Ambassador Brooks, is the problem primarily one of funding?
No. The problem is the things I tried to allude to in my statement. And Los Alamos is a good example. Because for years we haven't developed security as a career progression, we haven't built the cadre of very, very experienced and knowledgeable security professionals. We have some, but we don't have enough, and that's what Admiral Childs has helped us to see for the long term. So the people who are doing this at the Los Alamos site office, there weren't enough of them. There are more now, and they weren't as experienced as you'd like. Secondly, there was a leadership issue within that group which no longer exists. Third, there had been a tendency at many of my site offices, including, I think, Los Alamos, to defer to the security people for security and to worry about all the other things the site office has had to do. And my site managers now understand they can't do that, that security is too important. And fourth, in my responsibility of supervising the site offices, I didn't have as good a mechanism to make sure that they were doing their job, and that's the purpose of this new office. So it was all the things that I alluded to in my statement. It was not an issue of funding. It was an issue of organization. We had, before 2002, an extremely fragmented, look back, there are a number of past reports, an extremely fragmented organization in the Department of Energy where it's very difficult to tell who's in charge. And one of the things we've tried to correct is to make it clear that I'm in charge and under me my site manager in all areas. We're still working to make sure that concept's fully understood, but it's clearly the right way to run the complex.
Thank you. Mr. Podolsky, are there examples of other sites in the weapons complex where line management has been effective in identifying security matters before they emerge? Have we done it right in other places?
From our perspective, yes, sir. Pantex is an excellent example.
A Texas facility, I might point out.
I do notice that, Congressman, yes. And considering the mission that's there, that's also quite heartening to know that they have such a strong site management program.
And if I may, Congressman, it's interesting. It's the same size program. So that's why it's not primarily a question of resources. It's a question of leadership and training. And we're trying to use those standards at Pantex as a model for the rest of my sites.
Well, Ambassador Brooks, do you feel that you are going to be able to convince Los Alamos and other sites to improve line management attention to security matters before they become further security problems?
On the federal side, I'm absolutely convinced, and I have no reason to doubt it on the contractor side. There are always going to be problems. I want to make it clear. There are always going to be problems. This is a huge, complex enterprise. The point is, are the federal officials responsible for providing supervision, finding those problems in time to make sure that they're corrected? And that's what that's what we're going to be able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Mr. Inslee, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I wanted to ask you some questions about Hanford site. If you can update us on consolidation efforts there and plutonium transfer efforts, I'd be appreciative.
Hanford's not one of my sites, sir. I am going to have to take a pass. Glenn, are you in a position to address that? We may need to answer that for the record, sir. We may have the wrong people at the table.
The Hanford site falls under the Undersecretary for ESC, and I believe that nomination is up and has not been confirmed yet. So I do not have the information on that.
We'll talk to some other folks. I was reading an article about a year ago talking about security in a broad context, and it was suggesting in reference to the GAO report that precipitated a lot of our concerns. And the GAO report, as I recall it, basically suggested that there needed to be a new bar, a new standard, if you will, for security, that an original sort of standard was to prevent an intruder from seizing a weapon or plutonium and leaving the site and using it for nefarious purposes somewhere else, and that we really needed a system that would prevent intrusion and the ability to detonate or utilize in some way on site. How would you characterize efforts to meet that standard? Met, unmet? Is there dates you can discuss with us in that regard?
Yes, sir. I'll be able to say a little bit more about this in closed session, but we operationalize that through the so-called design basis threat. And you're absolutely correct. Before September 11th, all of us assumed that the threat was somebody coming to steal highly enriched uranium or plutonium to take it someplace else and use it. And therefore, we could afford to let them get to the vault as long as we could kill them on the way out. And so if we could contain them, and that was the term we used, containment, that was an adequate security standard. After 9/11, we realized that there were people who were willing to die in order to cause harm to the United States, and it's hard to think of something that would have a greater effect than some kind of nuclear detonation. So we needed to move to a situation where we prevented people from ever reaching the material. That turns out to be a much more demanding problem, and it depends very much on how many people you think you're defending against and what kind of equipment they come. And we've made two judgments, one in May of '03 and then another in October of last year, about how many people. And that's associated. In May of '03, we made a determination, and we will be fully compliant with that standard by the end of next year. The new, more demanding standard that we implemented in October of '04, the Department has established, it is an extremely conservative standard, and I'll talk about that in the closed session, but the Department has established the end of FY '08. The site assistance visits that Mr. Podonsky talked about are partly an attempt to figure out how we tailor to each site the best way to meet that threat. That may depend on money in the '07 budget that I don't quite know where it is yet. So we're on schedule and fully funded to meet the threat established in '03. We have a schedule and a plan, but we still don't have enough fidelity to know exactly what it's cost for the more robust threat established in October of last year.
Now, maybe this is an unanswerable question, but that just seems to be a time period that just is something I can't accept. Just sitting here, and I don't have to do the hard work like you do, but if someone said I wanted to prevent terrorists from coming into this hearing room and eliminating some members of Congress, and they said we're going to finish the job at the end of '08, I would just, I wouldn't find that acceptable. I'd think, look, there's got to be some mechanical ability to achieve this goal at an earlier period. Is budgetary problems a problem really getting this job done before?
Not all.
Let me finish my question. And just if you could try to characterize to us, if we said that's just not acceptable to the demands of the public, and I don't think it is, what does it take to accelerate completion of that project?
Couple things. First, we have, in some cases, put compensatory measures which are manpower intensive, so that you have some confidence but not enough confidence before. The answer, I think the honest answer is I don't know what it takes to accelerate '08, because I don't know what it takes to do '08. We established this standard, and we are now trying to gather the information through the site assistance visits. We will have inputs from each site this summer, and then we'll see, as we prepare the '07 budget, what has to be done. At some sites, I believe it'll actually be relatively easily. The highly enriched uranium material facility at Y-12, for example, was designed so that it was less sensitive to the size of the attacking force. Nevada Test Site, the Site Assembly Facility, was designed so it is less sensitive to the size of the attacking force. And so we'll be there probably relatively easy. Other places, I think, are going to prove more complex. So I don't know. In some cases, I don't think it's money, because in some cases it takes a certain amount of time to build things. Let's take the Y-12 facility. If you went to Y-12 now, you'd see a bunch of buildings, and in there are, quote, vaults. But when you dug into it, you'd find those vaults are just, rooms, because they were built in a different era. And they're not located where you would locate them if you were going to have a, quote, vault. They're located where it was convenient to build. So they're on the outside of buildings closest to the fence. Well, you've obviously got to fix that, and the way to fix it is to consolidate it into a very highly secure building. We're building that building, but it's going to take some years to build it, and to a certain limit, you can't build a building faster by throwing more money at it. It takes what it takes.
So if somehow you've got a congressional White House mandate to accelerate that by 12 months, what would you do?
I'd buy more guards. And I'd do it with compensatory measures. That would be inefficient, but that's sort of what we're doing now. We've established a regime where we do certain things with very heavy additional protective force, because we don't yet have the material in this secure building. In the short term, the only thing you can do is throw people at it. In the longer term, you throw design and technology at it, and that's the solution we're working toward. But I'd welcome the chance to explore this in closed session. I do want to stress the design basis threat that we decided to impose on ourselves in October of 2004 is an extremely conservative threat, more conservative than is being used elsewhere in the government. So I do want to assure you that we've set ourselves a real stretch goal in being able to defend against this threat, and it is a threat that I believe is unlikely to be mounted, but it's the consequences are so severe that we've chosen to establish that as our standard.
Thank you.
Congressman, if I might, you shouldn't leave the hearing thinking that the department is not aggressively moving out to the denial strategy. The previous design basis threat of 03 in some sites are actually very close to completion in a lot of their efforts, and that is a continuation on to 04. And as Ambassador Brooks says, the next one is in fact a stretch, but we all share the same concerns, and that's why we have these SAVs taking place, so that we can help the sites find the strategies, find the technology, and we can get it as implemented as rapidly as possible. The 08 date is when everybody has to be compliant. That doesn't mean they wait until September of 08.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, who is vice chairman of this subcommittee, is recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I think you've heard pretty clearly from my colleagues a great frustration at the cost of the stand down and the delay in implementing some of these requirements and security efforts. And I know you've been working on it, but it just seems to me that if the University of California was hired to do the job and they didn't do it, and it resulted in a stand down that now costs taxpayers maybe upwards of $360 or $20 or $160 million. And I think I'm hearing today there's no penalty that can probably be extracted against them in the existing contract. Something's broken. And I know, I'm sure, I know Chairman Barton feels this way, that, and I know I do, that the University of California should have to pay something in this process. It's outrageous when you look at the costs that we're absorbing to improve Homeland Security, and then we've got a contractor that's supposed to be providing all this, and you all have to step in and shut everything down. What do the people do during this multi-month period of the stand down? What do the people inside do?
First, I do need to correct one thing. While it is almost certain that I would have stepped in and shut it down, the laboratory director, who was a University of California employee, is the one who imposed the stand down. And it is to his credit that he recognized the problems.
I understand it was such a mess they had to shut it down. The duration, though, is the issue. Why does it take this long to figure out the problem?
It took the duration, which I believe surprised both the laboratory director and me. We thought it would be much closer to half that, was because as you dig into trying to do a very, very thorough job, we found that the problems within the organization were deeper and wider spread.
Right.
And so we made a decision, which I made, that having gone this way, we were going to do it right. That is, we were going to find and fix the problems, because we didn't want to go through this pain and this cost and not be able to say we're going to make the lab better at the end.
I understand that, and that's where you identify the 350 issues followed by 3,000 issues. But that tells me as a manager, and I own my own business and have for 19 years, that somebody wasn't watching the store.
No question of that, sir.
And that somebody, okay, so a few people maybe were let go or penalized, but the big somebody, the University of California, isn't suffering, are they?
The university is suffering, I would submit to you, in three areas. One is the monetary penalty that I imposed as part of
That's the reduction in fees?
That's a reduction in fee.
But you testified those come right back to the lab.
The university has traditionally taken its fee and used it for its own supervisory actions, and then anything that was left over has been poured back to the lab. So the university has never, in the 60 years that it has run the lab, used the fees for any purpose other than the lab. That's just been the university's.
Okay. And how much was that reduction?
The reduction was $5 million, sir.
Okay.
There's $3 million penalty. It's a little complicated.
How much of that was related to the stand down?
$3 million was directly related to the stand down and was imposed punitively. An additional $2 million was the result of the grade of unsatisfactory in operations.
So
which,
like a 1%, 1.5% hit
well,
on,
of
the,
the fee,
on the loss. What's the
of
total
loss,
fee?
Yes. Total
that's
fee,
paid?
total fee that they would have been eligible for was 8.8. They ended up at 3.
All right.
So that's first area. Second, I believe that the university, which takes great pride in its reputation, has suffered an intangible but very real benefit. And third, we're doing a competition, and the record, if the university chooses to compete, their record in this, their successes in areas and their failures will be part of the competition.
Isn't there still lacking a final determination on the reasonableness of the duration of the stand down in relation to its impact on the overall allowability of the costs?
Yes, sir, there is, and that's what I was trying to make it clear in response to an earlier question. That is a determination that is made by the contracting officer. I've been urged by the chairman to be personally involved in that, and I intend to. So there is a determination yet to be made, but I don't want to mislead the committee. You are holding a report from probably our most knowledgeable individual in the field, who has offered an opinion that that determination will find that these are allowable costs. And so I didn't.
You don't want to prejudice that.
I don't want to prejudice it, but I also don't want to mislead the committee.
Sure. No, I understand that. That's reasonable. I have a list of DOE's security initiatives that was presented at a hearing before this subcommittee last May, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent this list be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman. I believe the staff has a copy of that. The list has 14 security initiatives, and I understand that Mr. Podonsky has the responsibility to track the progress of these initiatives for the department. And I understand from your testimony, sir, that the department's fallen behind on several of these initiatives. Could you just apprise the committee, go through this list, identify for us those initiatives that have not been implemented and why?
Yes, sir.
The key ones, at least.
My office was given the responsibility to track the progress, and that's done monthly. Each of the initiatives were assigned to a program office by separate memorandum, either from the former Deputy Secretary Kyle McSlero or from Ambassador Brooks to his organizations. And they report their progress, the programs offices report the progress to us. Specifically, if we divided them up into 4 categories: information security, new technologies, consolidation of material, and then strengthening human capital. To answer your question specifically, the cyber enhancements is lagging.
That's number 2 on this list?
That's number 2. The diskless desktop computing was lagging up until last month, and that's been moving out quite nicely now. The keyless technology, that's in progress. The Blue Sky Commission, that deserves a special note. This is something that both Ambassador Brooks and I have a responsibility for, but we both agreed setting up a commission. While it's something that we would like to do long term, it's been difficult to find the people to serve on the commission, but that did not stop us from looking at existing technologies and getting some of them deployed to the field as we speak right now in pilot programs. The other lagging ones,
Weapons complex review.
the weapons complex review is one that just recently got underway, but it still has a due date or report to the Congress of April 05.
Are you going to meet that?
Yes,
April?
sir. We're going to meet it with a verbal report with a final written report. We had more trouble than I expected to get the right people on that committee. It's an external review.
I see.
The other one, Congressman, is the long-term storage. That's a complex matter.
Which number is that, sir?
8, I believe.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
And the problem with that is finding the material at different sites that no longer need to use those material at that site, and where do you send that material? And it's, as I said in my opening remarks and in my written testimony, that involves more than just the Department of Energy.
Would this involve, for example, universities elsewhere around the country that may have little amounts of...
No, sir. There is a program to deal with that is moving fairly well. No, here's the problem here. It's primarily a plutonium problem. We have plutonium that we don't need and we need to get rid of. And we don't have a fully identified path to eliminate it. Some of it we're going to turn into mixed oxide fuel under a separate program, but some of it's not suitable for that. We're barred from bringing that plutonium into the state of South Carolina for a complex reason that I can go into if you need to. So now you're in a situation without having a technically adequate path out, which we're still developing. So you have a situation where you'd like to move material out of where it is to consolidate it in a separate place, but you don't have a separate place to consolidate it to. So we're looking, for example, now at a facility in Idaho built for another purpose. We're looking at whether that could be a place to consolidate material pending disposition. For highly enriched uranium, it's much easier. You have a place to put that at Y-12. There, the problem is that the highly enriched uranium that's around the complex we're largely using, and it's a question of when we can stop. But on plutonium, the issue is finding a place to put this stuff till we can figure out its long-term disposition, which is a technically difficult and somewhat emotional issue.
Indeed. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate the work you're doing and your candor today.
Ms. Blackburn, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for being here. We appreciate this today. We've talked a lot about Los Alamos, but I've got a question. I want to ask you about Crystal River and about the Crystal River complex. And I think that probably many of my colleagues were really stunned to learn about the problems that occurred there, and are curious to know whether or not, despite officials saying that they followed all the proper regulations, if the worker verification program, which has been used in Florida, was followed with this, because the problem there was those who had gained unlawful entry to our country were working in that facility. And I'm pulling this from a March 12th article that was in the Washington Times. And what I would like to know is, do the current Department of Energy or NRC regulations require that contractors use the worker verification program? Because you all have talked extensively this morning about increasing training, about the need for human capital security, the need to secure materials. But if you do not know who it is, if they are using false documentation, if they are using a false identity, how do you know who it is that you are allowing access? So do you require them to use the worker verification program?
I cannot answer with respect to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission sites, which I believe is the subject of that story. For us, because we generally require security clearance, we're in a much different world because we therefore have to, first we have to have U.S. citizens, and secondly, we have the investigative requirements that are associated with a Q clearance. So for most of the people at our sites, this doesn't become an issue because of the requirement for U.S. citizenship. With regard to what the NRC does, I'll be happy to try and get you an answer for the record, ma'am, but we don't know.
That is okay. That's fine. So what you're saying is that the NNSA has safeguards,
yes, ma'am,
that would prevent anything from occurring like it did at the NRC site.
I
that
believe
would
so.
never be a problem?
But I haven't studied the particular occurrence. I'll look at it. If that's not right, I'll get you a corrected answer for the record. But certainly, we have safeguards that ensure that we only have U.S. citizens who have been investigated and granted the proper clearance. That's an extremely important part of our security approach.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. I have another question for you. You've mentioned when we talk about the security initiatives and the new DBT, and this kind of goes in with what Mr. Walden was just speaking to you about. You've talked about tracking progress and having routine interactions, but do you have a timeline that would implement the security initiatives and the new DBT? I'm not seeing a document, or haven't been able to find a document that says this is our timeline,
yes,
these
ma'am.
are our benchmarks. You alluded to possibly that there may be something.
We have for the May 03 DBT, the end of fiscal year 06, we monitor progress. A couple of my sites are essentially there. For the October 04 further enhancements, we've set ourselves a goal of the end of 08. We don't have a detailed schedule yet. That's what we'll be developing this summer as a result of the site assistance visit process that Mr. Podonsky was describing.
Okay. And GAO has said that you all lack a formal program management structure and need to implement guidance for directing the work of its contractors. And what specific actions are you taking to address that situation?
The former Deputy Secretary required in response partly to that and partly to just general concern that we establish a formal program management structure. It's in its early stages, and I think the jury is still out on whether what we've done so far is adequate. We're very good at project management. I mean, we can point to you some examples where we haven't been, but basically we have the structure and the procedures and the training and the qualification to be good at project management. But to manage overall programs, we have in NNSA, I think we have about 54 programs, and to look at each of those, we do annual reviews by me. The department has a series of milestones under a system called Joule, but we were also looking at quarterly snapshot of each program for the Deputy Secretary to make sure that we're starting to manage programs as overall entities and not just focusing on individual projects.
Are you using the PMA or the rating tools there? Are you using any of those items?
I use PART. The President's Management Agenda was very important to the previous Secretary and the Deputy, and there's every evidence they'll be even more important to the current Secretary, who has a very strong management background. I use PART. The Department uses PART as required by the Office of Management and Budget. In addition, I've established PART as the internal NNSA review tool. So when I go through my annual reviews, we do a PART assessment for every program every year, even though the Office of Management and Budget will only have us assess 2 or 3 of them. Our initial experience with that was that our internal assessments were rosier than OMB. More recently, we've been coming much closer. And what you do is you look at what you said, and then when OMB gives you their grade, you look at the comparison. And what you want to make sure is that your self-assessment is honest. And if it's honest, you'll come out pretty close to the OMB grade. For the last cycle, I came out very close on the 4 projects they.
Well, if you're going through 54 programs a year, you're a busy man.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Podonsky, a couple of questions. The Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge, which is in Tennessee, my state. The initial plans there were for an underground storage facility. And this was changed to an above-ground facility. So if you will, please address why that was changed to an above-ground facility, why DOE approved it, and even though the Inspector General said it was going to cost more and be less secure.
I would love to answer that, but since the facility is actually owned by Ambassador Brooks, I would suggest that he would give you those answers as to why those decisions were made. I could only give you a view of how robust we think the plans are.
Okay. Ambassador Brooks.
There were two competing designs. Neither of them were actually underground. The water table at Y12 makes it difficult to do a true underground facility. So there are two competing designs, one which has been referred to as the berm design, which essentially had an earth cover, and one which did not. Those were not the only differences between the designs, and I can get into a little more detail in closed session, but the designs had a number of features that differed. We concluded that the so-called bermed design was not likely. First, it was subject to single point failure. That is, there's a particular vulnerability that if people were able to penetrate, we didn't have a good backup. And secondly, we were concerned that it was very sensitive to assumptions about the size of the attacking force. And that's a big deal because, as we can talk about more in closed session, when I talk about changes in the design basis threat, one of those changes is how large the attacking force we assume is. So what you'd like is a facility that doesn't depend on the intelligent judgment of the day about how big the force was. We therefore shifted to the second design. We could have added to that a berm. We chose not to. We chose not to because our assessment was that it was adequate, that it would cost another, I think the estimate is $35 million in design costs and delay construction 2 years to redesign it. And it sounds easy to just put dirt over it, but when you put 22 feet of dirt on top of a building, it turns out you have to build a different building. That the improvements in security didn't outweigh the importance of moving forward. You know, there are alternate views. The Inspector General report, and I can, excuse me, I'm just trying to make sure what I can talk about. We had an assessment done, I want to be very precise on what was done, by Sandia, which convinced me that the design we have was adequate. Sandia wasn't asked to say in a perfect world what they do, and my guess is they'd have wanted some kind of combined design, but we concluded the design we had was adequate. It was superior to the alternate design for reasons unrelated to the amount of earth, and that it was more important to get on with building it. That's the judgment we made.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn, and thank you very much for participating in the panel this morning. We appreciate the testimony of both of you. I would make one other comment. Mr. Ambassador Brooks, when do you anticipate that you will make this final determination on the reasonableness of the duration of the stand-down in relation to its impact on the overall allowability of the cost of the contract?
I'm sorry, sir. I actually don't know the answer to that. I will let your staff know and provide it formally for the record, but I am not sure of the schedule on which the contracting officer is slated to make that. I just suddenly realized on the way over here that I didn't know the answer to that, and I didn't have time to check.
Well, we look forward to hearing from you on that. I would also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter that we sent to Secretary Bodman
just recently on these 14 initiatives initiated by Secretary Abraham, in which we asked the Secretary to give us an update on all 14 of those initiatives. And so I expect that the two of you may very well be involved in that as well, and we look forward to your response to that letter as well.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to reconvene after our next two panels. We have two more panels. We have an individual on each panel, but we'll be reconvening in room 2218 as soon as we finish the other two panels. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you upstairs.
Sure.
Now, at this time, I'd like to call our next witness, Mr. Nanos, Peter Nanos, who is the director of the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And Mr. Nanos, we appreciate your being with us here today. As you know, it is the custom of the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee to have witnesses testify under oath. And I would ask you, do you have any difficulty doing that this morning?
No, sir.
And do you wish to have legal counsel with you when you testify?
No, sir.
Okay. Then if you will stand, I'll swear you in. Do you solemnly swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, sir.
Mr. Nanos, thank you very much, and you are now under oath, and with that, we would welcome you to give your opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Stupak, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to update you on the status of security at Los Alamos. My name is Dr. Pete Nanos, and I have served as Director of the Department of Energy's Los Alamos National Laboratory since 2003. I came to the laboratory from the Navy, where I retired as a Vice Admiral. Before I begin, I wanted to thank Chairman Barton and the committee for your support of the improvements that we've made at the laboratory. Congressman Stupak, I would be happy to respond to any questions you have today regarding audits conducted by one of our contract employees, Dan Brown. We have thoroughly supported his investigation and drafting of his white paper, and have gone through a lot of detailed analysis of all of the elements of that white paper. Some of the ones, like welding and QA of plutonium fabrication and all, I've been personally involved in, and so, of course, and we can even talk about the boundaries in the closed session of some of the aspects. Because of his clearance level, he wasn't in some cases able to see the whole operation, but we can go into that in detail later. I want to emphatically state that the employees of Los Alamos National Laboratory are dedicated to the national security mission of this great nation, and they take very seriously their responsibilities to personally safeguard America's secrets. The laboratory conducts important work for the nation, most notably ensuring the safety and reliability of the nation's strategic deterrent. Clearly, a component of that mission is the need to safeguard the national security information entrusted to our care. I'm here today to tell you that I believe we are doing a good job in security, and I want to reaffirm to you our commitment to do even better. Los Alamos National Laboratory is a safer, stronger, more secure laboratory than when I last addressed this committee. The first point I'd like to make is that the suspension of lab operations in July 2004 was necessary, and the employees who were at fault in the security and safety incidents that led to the suspension have been held accountable by the laboratory and the University of California. My decision to suspend laboratory operations was not easy, and I would like to spend some time here explaining what led to the suspension. At the outset, it is important to note that during the suspension, the laboratory was open and employees were required to come to work throughout. No new funds were required during this time. We used existing funds. I'd also like to clarify a little bit on the cost issue. I think Ambassador Brooks is entirely right that the estimate that you've referred to him, the higher estimate, was an upper bound, a very conservative upper bound. Our method of binning costs for our number was based on mutual agreement between us and the site manager, in other words, the NNSA contracting officer. And we decided to use an accepted accounting practice of determining those costs based on the manager's estimates of where people were working and did not go to the higher cost option of introducing thousands of new accounts and a great amount of administrative costs. And that was a decision we mutually made. Also, we as people started to work on programmatic work again, we put their charges on that programmatic work. For example, after about a month, approximately 2/3 of our labor costs were back on their normal programmatic work. That wouldn't have been, that was recognized under our procedure, was not recognized under the Albuquerque procedure. So there clearly is an opportunity to go into great detail on this and satisfy you in that regard. During this period, employees did productive work, either program work or work related to safety and security in support of our mission. Additionally, at no time did we suspend activities that were immediately critical to national security and or the continuity of operations, security, and environmental compliance and protection. Many of you have heard that two major incidents led to my decision to suspend operations: the July Classified Removable Electronic Media, or CREM incident, which I will describe further below, as well as a safety incident just days later where a student's retina was burned by a laser. What many people do not know is that these two incidents took place against a backdrop of a recent rise in safety and security incidents, as well as growing correlations showing that our employees who were poor safety performers were also proved to be poor in security and compliance. Further, I was concerned that the July CREM incident showed clear signs of a behavior problem versus any sort of honest mistake. Confronted in July with back-to-back cases of seeming disregard for basic safety and security rules, I did not have a good feel for the safety and security of lab operations, and therefore I had no choice but to suspend all operations at the lab. During the suspension of operations and the subsequent restart, we learned that there were many good reasons to have taken the action we did. In partnership with UC, the DOE, and NNSA, we followed a rigorous restart process. As a matter of fact, it was codified in great excruciating detail. And and the most important thing here is that we conducted management self-assessments of all of our organizations that identified more than 3,000 issues, ranging from safety compliance issues to permitting violations that needed to be addressed, including 340 pre-start issues that we felt had to be addressed before the activities could restart. We fixed the 350 pre-starts and have created a project to implement and track the remaining fixes and changes. We resumed operations as quickly as possible with 100% of our lowest risk operations, which, by the way, represent 89% of all lab activities, and as I previously stated, roughly 2/3 of our labor costs, were resumed by August 18th, and the majority of operations up and running by late September, early October. Some of our highest hazard operations did not resume until February 2005. I want to go back now and focus on the July CREM incident for a moment. This incident began when employees were unable to locate two barcoded pieces of accountable CREM. As a result of independent investigations conducted by the DOE, the FBI, and a joint lab UC investigation, we now know with high confidence that the disks never existed and that the incident was the result of an unauthorized practice. Barcode numbers that were entered into our accountability system but never affixed to actual media. We had no way of knowing this initially, and we were further led astray by two employees who falsified an inventory sheet, incorrectly indicating that the disk had actually existed at one point in time. We concluded that although human error and improper action were the direct cause of the incident, there were additional systemic contributing weaknesses. Among them are the sheer size and geographic spread of our CREM operations, which included an inventory of accountable CREM that exceeded 80,000 pieces at its high point. More than 4,500 employees had daily direct access to CREM, and classified operations spread over roughly 40 square miles. Upon thorough review of the investigation, I made the decision to terminate 3 employees as a result of their involvement in this incident. Additionally, 4 employees received written reprimands and suspension without pay, and I removed the division leader from that position and had the individual reassigned to non-supervisory duties. My second point is that Los Alamos has made real lasting changes in the way we handle crime that significantly reduce the likelihood of future problems. After meeting out discipline, I turned our attention to completely revamping the classified control system to help prevent a recurrence of this incident. With concurrence of the University of California, LANL acted to move all media into secure centralized libraries, to establish full-time CREM custodians, and to fund expanded classified medialess or diskless computing. The major elements of our efforts include the following. All accountable CREM has been moved from the hundreds of previous locations into one of 20 centralized base libraries. Additionally, we established 14 satellite libraries to provide secure storage of media in close proximity to operational work areas. All CREM is under the direct ownership of approximately 40 custodians, a 99% reduction compared to the previous 4,500 employees who had direct access to CREM. Trained and certified classified library custodians are assigned to each library. They are responsible for checking items out and conducting daily transactional inventories to ensure classified media is positively accounted for at all times. The library custodians are deployed security professionals reporting directly to the Security Division. To ensure the libraries maintain a high level of performance, we began no-notice inventory inspections. The laboratory is pushing hard on line organizations to destroy unneeded accountable CREM. We have destroyed over 7,000 items in the past 2 months, with many more entering the destruction pipeline. As of March 4th, the lab has 20,074 pieces of CREM and expects to further reduce this to less than 2,000 by the end of FY06, a 97% decrease from our earlier high point. With significant funding support from Congress, we are also moving to a diskless environment through the expansion of our classified computing network. My third and final point this morning is that thanks to significant investments in physical security, the laboratory's physical site remains secure from threats. As you know, DOE has recently revised their design basis threat, which articulates the adversary force size and capabilities that we must be able to defend against. We have been working literally from September 11th to fundamentally change the September 11, 2001, to fundamentally change the security posture for our site. An amazing array of upgrades and improvements has been made, all for the singular goal of safeguarding the people and security interests under our control. I am particularly proud to point out that the most recent DOE inspection of the protective force performance at TA-18 clearly shows that the facility is well defended and the nuclear materials housed there are secure. The Department has made the decision to relocate the TA-18 mission and the nuclear materials to Nevada, and we are fully committed to making this happen as quickly as possible. Nonetheless, I am confident in our ability to defend the site, and that confidence is reinforced by DOE assessments that tell me we are good and getting better, and I personally attended as an observer the force-on-force exercises last year in this regard. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that the investments made at Los Alamos during the suspension have created a Los Alamos that is stronger, safer, and more secure. I can't sit here today and tell you that we will never have another safety or security incident at Los Alamos, but what I can guarantee is that the management at Los Alamos and the University of California is doing everything possible to continue the improvements to both safety and security. We will continue to deliver on our commitment to the safety and security of this nation. I promise you that. Again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address you, and I would be glad to answer any questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nanos. We appreciate your testimony. And I have with me here some transcripts from 3 oversight and investigation hearings that the Congress, this subcommittee, conducted back in 2003 regarding procurement and property mismanagement failures at Los Alamos. And you can see from the size of these transcripts that this committee spent a lot of time on mismanagement at Los Alamos. And I know that you were not hired to be responsible for this program by the University of California until 2003, which was sometime right after these hearings were conducted. But then in September of 2004, we received a copy of an audit that was performed by the equivalent of the Inspector General for the University of California regarding lack of procurement and property controls at an area called Technical Area Number 16. And specifically, they were talking about the fact that 21 unauthorized sheds were built at Los Alamos and filled with unauthorized materials, supplies, and equipment. And it went on to say that the University of California overpaid on these sheds. These sheds cost the University of California $8,255 per shed. The base price was $5,570. So the unauthorized sheds were built and overpaid by the University of California $56,000. Now, I know that these sheds were, in my understanding, built prior to your arrival. But this became public knowledge only in September. And I guess I'd have 2 points to my question here. One is there continues to seem to be this problem of mismanagement at Los Alamos regarding the University of California. Two, this audit performed by your Inspector General that found these sheds 3 years after they were built that were unauthorized, inflated prices were paid for them, unauthorized material being kept in them. Why would it take so long for you all to recognize that these were unauthorized and containing unauthorized material?
Sir, you were correct, I believe, in pointing out that those were sheds that had been previously looked at. When they were raised in the audit last year, we went back and immediately looked at the material, and we found out that the material was, in fact, proper material to be used at the site and in the laboratory. That in distinction from previous things that you were made aware of, there was no unauthorized material there in the sense that that was all legitimate material for use at the laboratory.
Now, when you say, are we talking about what was stored in the shed?
In the sheds, yes, sir. And some of it had been procured at the time of the sheds, and some of it had been procured subsequently, and the sheds were used for storage.
But you would agree that the sheds themselves, at least that process, was not properly conducted.
Well,
it was outside the scope.
Well, it was clear that contract was the one that had been previously looked at, had a fairly substantial increase in scope, growth in scope over the years, and that was one that our current procedures and process preclude from happening again. No one is authorized to increase the scope or the ceiling on contracts to the extent that that one had in the past. Also, we are reviewing the costs in the closeout process on that contract. We're reviewing the charges and deciding to what level we're going to dispute it. I'm almost positive we will end up disputing these charges and putting in a claim against the contractor for overcharges. In the normal closeout process of the contract, we, of course, go through and audit all the costs to make sure that they're right and proper and we're not being overcharged.
So you do intend to go back against the contractor for the overcharges on these
Yes,
buildings?
sir. We've not yet finished the closeout and audit and closeout on that contract, so that's still an open issue that we'll deal with.
And you do agree with this audit report, though, that shows the irregularities as it pertains to the building of these buildings outside the scope and so forth?
Yes, sir. Let me just take a moment to tell you what we're doing now. You can increase we had a problem with non-contracts people, non-buyers, making commitments for the laboratory with contractors and making constructive changes to contracts. In my first year, I changed our instruction to make it very clear that you had to have contract authority in order to make scope changes to contracts, formal contract mods, and that couldn't be done casually in the laboratory. We also have made it clear that all purchases under these contracts now have to go through authorized buyers, and that even an authorized buyer can't bump up the ceiling more than $200,000 on any large contract without going through a contract official. In other words, we didn't set that at zero because we didn't want to be administratively adding burden to everything. Because often when we buy things, it's important to get it in a timely manner because we don't want to be building up personnel costs for want of a nail. But on the other hand, we do not want people increasing the ceiling on contracts without going through our proper contracting channels. So we've established a policy that has to be formally done now, and that will preclude this type of activity from occurring in the future.
Now, there are allegations that there are other types of structures out there that may have been built under the same circumstances. Do you expect that we'll have some other revelations as we move along?
Sir, we have a tremendous number of temporary structures and transportables at the laboratory, and it's one of the big difficulties that I have to face is that I have an awful lot of substandard space that we're trying to move out of, and each one of those, though, is cataloged, has a building number, even if it's a trailer. So we are not, and many of our structures go back to the 50s. So it's not I wouldn't say it's a modern, well-ordered site in general. And we're trying to manage our way through that, coalesce, consolidate, get rid of unneeded space, and reduce the cost of our footprint, our facility footprint. And so there are, it's hard to go to Los Alamos and view the site and not come away with a feeling that there are a lot of temporary-looking structures.
Chairman Barton recently sent a letter to Ambassador Brooks saying that he thought that the University of California should pay a portion of the cost of the stand-down. And you've heard our discussion earlier about the cost figure. But from your perspective with the University of California, do you feel like that the Department of Energy can legally charge the University of California with a portion of those costs, pursuant to the terms of your contract?
Sir, I don't want to get into I'm not qualified to talk about the legal issues. I spent 8 years running major contracting activities in the DOD, so I do have some experience. I feel that all the work that we did during the period of the stand-down was work that was authorized under the statement of work, and I know there is some of parts of the charges or the costs that we've exposed to our contracting officer that are still being looked at in the normal course. In other words, they haven't finished their review. But to my knowledge, everything that we did, which was management self-assessments, which is called under contractor assurance, and identification of deficiencies and frankly correcting deficiencies is all work that we're called upon to do in the normal course. We just normally don't do it in such a concentrated way. Also, other than that work, which was, I think, the main heavy lifting of the management self-assessment, the assessment of risk and correction of deficiencies, the rest of the work that was going on that time was all our normal programmatic work. And I'm happy to say that the laboratory, I expect that within the next month, the laboratory to be back on schedule with our major programs. In other words, we've been able to immediately reapply ourselves back to our mainline DOE programs and get back on schedule.
And as a result of the stand-down, how far was your programmatic work delayed, or how long?
The programmatic, I'd have to go back and look at the exact change in milestones. But if you look at where these milestones, in other words, there were some deliverables at the end of the fiscal year that we did not meet, and it got continued into the next fiscal year. But we are catching up on those particular areas of production and tests that are required to support major life extension programs for our systems. The most critical part of the work, which was safety, security, and assessment of the stockpile for the country, we kept on schedule despite the stand down. So we did slip some milestones, and I'll give you an example. Tests in support of a major life extension program that were delayed are the experimental setup has been completed, and we expect by the end of the month to be back on schedule with that testing. And that was in an area, that was with a division that was the one that had the security problems and many of the compliance problems, and took us the longest to rebuild. So I'm very proud of their intense effort to get back on schedule and meet the national need.
Sure. Mr. Stupak, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Nanos, it's good to see you again. I think we've met when you first, when you just started at Los Alamos when we were out there that time for the visit.
Yes, sir.
Let me see if I get this right. You're an employee of UC, right? University of California?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. And you know, we would hope that when we see you again, it's not in a situation where we're talking about another slip-up at Los Alamos. So we'd really like to, I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody on the committee, have better dialogue with the lab. I know you have an office here and things like that, so you get the University of California, you got your law firm, you got DOE and all that, but we should really have more interaction and dialogue so we can work together more on some of these things. Your lab just came up with an announcement the other day on that Muon, which might show of, am I saying right, Muon or wherever you said that?
Muon radiography,
yeah,
yes, sir.
Detection. Now that's stuff that, you know, let us know so we can help work together on some of these things. That's what we'd like to do instead of always being here when things are not going too well for you. Let me ask you this. Mr. Brown, and I know he mentioned the white paper, he had been at Los Alamos for over 18 months and had observed the practices and had drawn some comparisons based upon his 30 years of experience in assessing adequacy at nuclear industry practices at various organizations under the oversight of DOE and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So was Mr. Brown a qualified auditor?
As far as I know, that within his experience, he was qualified to do the job that we gave him. He was obviously working for my performance surety division, and he had been assigned to that work by the division leader, who I have great confidence in, by the way. So
So you'd be
confident that, you know, it's, the point I'm making here is that I do not have any issue with Mr. Brown and what he did, and we've taken his comments seriously.
Have you discussed them with Mr. Brown?
I haven't personally, but I have been involved in some of the issues. I can give you an example of one, for example.
No, I mean,
I mean where we've, in other words, I haven't talked to him, but his reports have come to me,
yeah.
and
I guess what I'm looking at, if he wrote his letter on October 22nd, 2004, has anyone gotten back with Brown and said, hey, you know, you might be mistaken on this weld point? I think that was an issue you brought up.
Well, he wasn't. Let me give the weld point's a good one, because that one I know a lot about.
Well, I don't want to dwell on it.
He wasn't mistaken. But
my point I'm trying to say, has anyone ever gotten back with Brown?
That's a good, I don't know. I haven't personally. I'll
see what I mean about the mix-up of dialogue? I wish someone would have sat down, because when we go into closed session, we're going to ask you some more, a little bit more specific stuff in here. But you see, no one gets back with the guy, and then there's back and forth with us, and then that's why we need to work together on these things. Because if he's qualified, obviously he has some concerns, and he still's not satisfied, and no one's gotten back with him. So can you see how the thing gets sort of out of control?
Yes, sir. And the only part I'm short on is, since I didn't talk to him personally and nobody reported to me that they had talked to him personally, I can't tell you the degree to which he's been gotten back to, but I'll get that answer.
Okay. You know, he goes on and he says, the University of California faces precarious times. Management's lack of emphasis on nuclear quality assurances increases the risk of a clear and present danger to employees and to public health. Ineffectual management practices, an air of superiority, complacency to normal nuclear industry practices / procedures, combined with serious cultural biases, equate to an environment fraught with potential for dangerous consequences similar to the Challenger or Chernobyl disasters. And, you know, like I said, I've been on this committee now for 10 years, and just looking at Los Alamos' track record, it's, without further dialogue between us, it's hard to say who's correct here, Los Alamos or Mr. Brown?
Well, I think. Let me make the following question. I think I would probably have a discussion with him about the issue of something akin to Challenger or Chernobyl, but it is clear from my observations at the laboratory that we had to do something about our safety and compliance culture.
Sure.
Because of our record in Price-Anderson violations, because of our record in safety, and because of the correlation between, and what the security brought to it was that there was a behavioral aspect of people not wanting to go along with the rules that we had to deal with. So the shutdown was necessary to do that. We're also continuing to follow the shutdown with something we call operational efficiency, which is to take what we learned during the shutdown and institutionalize it. And also, I've introduced the DuPont STOP program, Safety Training Observation Program, which is a behavioral-based safety program because of our belief that we have to drive these kinds of concerns into the culture. So, if he says that, but if he says that there's work to be done at the laboratory to improve the culture for safety and compliance, I agree with him. That's why I shut the laboratory down.
And it's that culture, and I guess I used the same word earlier about the culture there, that we have these repeated problems related to security, trustworthiness, and safety that we're very, very concerned about. You indicated in your opening that you'd get back to us. I had asked for a detailed point-by-point accounting of Mr. Brown's allegations, and we really like someone to get that to us and bring it back to this committee. And you committed to do that?
Yes, sir.
And as soon as you can?
Yes, sir.
And at the same time, why don't you stick one in the mail to Mr. Brown, if that'd be appropriate there, or if you want, the committee will. I just think he needs to see that there is a culture change. You know, I was a little concerned. Mr. Burgess asked about the other plant there, nuclear plant, similar size, I think Ambassador Brooks said, which seems to run well, better than Los Alamos, obviously. And Los Alamos has been a lab for a long, long time, probably one of the first ones we had. And so I would think the expertise in security and all this would be at Los Alamos, not at a relatively new lab in Texas. So it's that culture I think that we're trying to break. And it sounds like, and I know you've only been there 2 years, you're starting to get to it. I was surprised but pleased to see that when you start your shutdown, there were 350 pre-start issues that you identified. And then once you got in there, you saw about, 3,000, I think it was, issues that have to be addressed. So you've got a big job ahead of you. Let me ask you this. When you do this stand down, does anyone come in from the outside to assist, or is this just an internal stand down and these 3,000 things you've identified internally? How's that work? I mean, do you bring in outside experts?
What we did first is that, and I've got a copy of it here, our restart instructions.
Sure.
In great detail on what we want people to look for. It covered everything in terms of safety, security,
sure,
personnel, leadership, everything. Then we convened something we called a Restart Review Board, which incorporated some outside consultants, my people, people sitting on it from the NNSA site office. In other words, the other thing I want to emphasize that this was not the lab and UC standing alone, standing up our laboratory. It was a cooperative effort with NNSA. So we got all eyes, and then they reviewed all the documentation for restart.
Sure.
For the entire laboratory, for the two highest levels of risk, level 2 and level 3. And since I reviewed all the documentation on their work and personally approved the restart in every area, I saw that they had done a very good job of bringing, in other words, striking a balance of risk across the laboratory. In other words, they were very uniform.
You said they did a good job. Who's they?
The RRB, this requirements, the Restart Review Board. They did an extremely good job of assessing risk and striking a balance. In other words, I wasn't taking extreme risks in one part of the lab and no risk in another. it was very well done and well documented across the laboratory.
So if I understand your answer, in this shutdown, you bring in people from NNSA,
Yes, sir.
right, and then outside consultants.
They were members of the of this review board. I
Right.
had some outside consultants that I had known in my
Right.
previous life
Okay.
that I had confidence in, and were able to.
As a result of the shutdown, having bring in these consultants, let me ask, do you think that'd be a fair cost for the taxpayer to pay, or is that one that you guys should probably eat that cost of the outside consultants and the NNSA?
It was the outside consultant in particular was one I had brought in to help with the formality of operations in the laboratory before the shutdown. So what I did is I just had him sit on this panel as part of his duties.
Sure. What are the challenges you face now, specifically as the lab director? You've been there for 2 years. You've been through a shutdown. What are your challenges to get it so we don't have you come back here in a year or two with another shutdown for some reason?
Well, I think it's hard for me, and I'm not asking for any mercy or anything, but I think if you look at the examples of similar change or turnarounds and culture changes in industry and other areas, I remember the model I was looking to when I was doing change in my last job in the Navy was the IBM model, where it took them 7 years to reform their corporate culture and organization and change the fundamental focus. It's hard to know how long this is going to be. I estimate that a change of this magnitude in an organization this size could take maybe 5 to 7 years. So I'm counting that I'm about 2 years into at least a 5-year process. So we're hopefully approaching the tipping point and coming down the backside of the mountain. But it's with a variety of operations and having to drive a corporate focus and not in other words, a laboratory. People used to joke that Los Alamos was 19 laboratories combined by a common janitorial service. But now I think the laboratory is working cooperatively as an entire institution to work its problems. And I think we've gotten to that point of unity and are now, as an organization, as a cohesive organization, starting to work our way through this. And it will take a number of years, I think, to get it out to every part of the laboratory. But I think the pace of change has been very aggressive. And I have to tell you, I'm very pleased with where we've come in a relatively short time. And during my tenure, I'm very proud of what the people have been able to accomplish. So I have confidence we're going to get there. Unfortunately, I think the record of other organizations and industries say that culture change of this magnitude is a long process.
One of the entities we deal with a little bit, and we've dealt with in dealing with Los Alamos, is the firm Covington and Burling, if I said that
Yes,
right. Does University of California pay them, or is it part of the
As far as
budget?
I know, I don't pay them.
Does it come out of the lab budget?
No, sir.
Do you know who pays them? Covington and Burlington for their time?
I assume that that's the University of California. I have no knowledge of that.
Very good.
They
Thanks.
talk to me occasionally, but I don't. As far as I know, I'm not paying for them.
Okay.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Dr. Burgess, you're recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, many of the instances of security mismanagement at Los Alamos over the years, including the recent incidents that we're talking about this morning last year, occurred within one specific program, the DX division. Can you explain why this division has had so many ongoing security problems?
Well, it's hard for me to go back before my tenure. I can tell you in the current situation, I made the determination once that I found something had happened. First of all, I want to separate the security problems into two bins. We had a number of security problems that I take personal responsibility for as management at the laboratory, because, you know, when you've got somebody in bad lighting conditions doing a destruction, trying to read the small numbers off a barcode and transposes a number and gets it wrong, makes a human error. I feel that management's failed that individual, that we've given them the system that work with that they can't deal with. What was unique about this case was that it involved behaviors, people who knew the rules, who didn't follow the rules, or who falsified documents and signed off improperly. And I think the key point that we made in this particular incident, as I went into it, compared to previous ones, as I said, remember I put 19 people on administrative leave or investigatory leave at the beginning of this, and the statement I made was that unless I find the answer of who did what with this material, these 19 people will never touch another piece of classified information at this laboratory again. I'll never take the risk until I find out what was done and how it was done properly. I think that, and we did find people who actually did things improperly. We terminated those people. And then we actually took action. I think that that established clearly the laboratory's standard of personal accountability. And frankly, I think where if the university has been weak in the past or the laboratory has been weak in the past, it's not being as strong about the personal accountability people have for classified information, for safety and compliance and environment. And we've made that clear at this time. So I can't go back and talk about before my term and how that was done, but I can tell you that I was dealing with these two types of things, and I was trying to do what I needed to do as the manager of the laboratory to protect people from simple administrative errors, and at the same time hold people that were accountable for malfeasance accountable for their actions, responsible for malfeasance accountable for their actions. And I think we drew that line successfully in this last incident, and hopefully that will help more than anything else to drive the culture.
Well, of course, the whole purpose of a barcode is so you won't transpose a digit.
Yes, sir.
But I'll accept that. I guess I'm disturbed about, though, the comment human error versus a behavioral problem. I mean, a behavioral problem at that level of security clearance, I mean, it seems to me it goes beyond just being put on administrative leave or having the security clearance removed. Was there ever any thought given to prosecuting the individuals involved?
We did exercise the full authority that we had in that regard, and we in fact terminated the employees that were involved, not just put them on leave. Once we found the facts and the people who actually, in other words, we had a graded approach. Basically, people were held accountable for and disciplined based on what they in fact did, and those who operated falsely were terminated, and those who took shortcuts with the administrative procedures, in other words, accepted a barcode when they knew they shouldn't, were in fact suspended without pay. So that there was discipline, and there was for each infraction based on the level of involvement.
So you believe it was that there wasn't criminal intent when you say adverse behavior or unacceptable behavior?
Well, when two people say, you know, hey, we're supposed to do the inventory, we don't want to do the inventory, let's just sign the document and say we did it. And they signed it.
I mean, I'm new here, but that's really bothersome to me. I mean,
Yes, sir.
we're talking about a big deal here, aren't we?
Yes,
Los
sir.
Alamos?
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's where they built the bomb and...
Yes, sir. Well, we in fact terminated those people.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just asked the question, is termination enough? If you have someone whose behavior is that aberrant in that type of facility?
Well, I don't have police powers. The people who were, in other words, the FBI was there with us doing the investigation. They're the ones that generally, in this case, would take that to the attorney.
I'll accept that, and I thank you
Yes,
for your
sir.
candor. I just have to ask, how in the world do you have a laser injury of that magnitude in a laboratory?
It was terrible. Frankly, the person who had that laboratory and was operating with that student was terminated because it was egregious. I had docked the pay, or I had adjusted. This was in a division where they had previous safety difficulties. In the previous year, because of other safety incidents, both the associate director and the division leader had had their pay adjusted downward to send a clear message that I expected better performance. And in this particular incident, I fired the individual who had control of the laboratory. His immediate supervisor was put on leave without pay. The division leader was removed from that position. I didn't terminate him because I felt he was trying to do the right thing, but he was ineffective. But because of his lack of effectiveness, I removed him from his position. And the associate director, who I felt did not spend the proper amount of attention on operational matters, I removed.
What has been the outcome of that injury? Has that person lost their sight?
That person has lost a large percentage. Basically, it destroyed the center part of her retina, and she has lost the center part of her vision and some of her depth perception as a result of that. And that's a permanent injury.
Yes, sir. What, as far as the obviously the laboratory board, the cost of those, the medical treatment?
Yes, and we have continued to follow up with her and her family.
And presumably some type of compensatory
I don't have the detail. I can get I don't know the detailed information. I've just got a recent report on her condition from my head physician, who had just been up to visit her and the family, but I don't know the final result of the compensation that she was given. I think we provided basically all the, I believe we provided all the medical care, but I don't want to get too far into that without getting the data for you.
Was the expense of the medical care and whatever compensation is going to be offered, is that borne by the university or by the taxpayer?
That's cost under the contract. For the care that we provide in that case, those services that we provide under the contract, we provide for all injuries. And we had, and by the way, that's another indicator that we had that things were not going well. We had a fairly substantial number of injuries last year that we had to deal with. But they are treated like all the rest of the industrial injuries.
Okay, I thank you for your candor. I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Walden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, following up on that point, I assume you have workers' comp coverage, right?
Yes, sir. We have workers' comp. And
so does this fall under that then?
I don't know that.
Workplace injury?
I think we responded immediately, so I'd have to go back and yeah. I don't want to get, as I said, sure. I don't have the data sheet in front of me, and I don't want, but I can get that for the record, sir.
I don't envy your task. You've got how many employees?
We have about a little over 8,000 University of California employees, and probably between 12 and 13,000 employees total on the Hill.
So you have 21,000.
A total of about 12.5 to 13,000.
Oh, total of 12.5 to 13.
Including our support contractors.
How many management staff out of that?
Let's see.
Ballpark.
I'd say the down to the division level, it's like a number like 60 or 70.
Managing 12 or 13,000.
Yeah, but we still have a much lower level of group leader. Which is below that division level. So, actually, the part of the issue that we're addressing is that we have a very broad, in some areas, a very broad span of control, which is probably part of the issue that we're facing.
Yeah. I mean, it's that balance between how much middle management do you have and need, and the cost of all
we tend to be on the low side, I believe. And
well, and I think that's what we're is a problem in the sense that. It strikes me that on this issue of accountability on the barcodes, the mismatched numbers, or the decision that they just weren't going to falsify the data, that there was no, given the importance of what they deal with, that there's no check and balance. I mean, I spent 5 years on a community bank board, and, a teller making $14,000 a year moving money's got to check and balance. Got to balance their till every night, and if you're going in and out of the vault, there are certain checks and balances.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, if you look at the business process, one of the immediate actions I took when I took over the laboratory was to go down to the group level and add administrative people that had been taken out, that were the ones that were doing some of this administrative checking. That there had been so much burden put on, at least at the group level, the managers, that they were unable to manage the science and manage the administrative part at the same time. So we've in fact, and you'll see that a lot of in my testimony, a lot of what we're doing now is by going to diskless computing, improving the classified network, and frankly, by shrinking the number of locations for classified material now from hundreds to tens, we're in the process. We have much more resources in terms of being able to conduct inventories and do checks and balances.
You have less to inventory, right?
We have, well, less the inventory, but fewer people doing it, and much tighter control. In other words, we do transactional, as I said, we do transactional inventories, for example, on a safe. You're the custodian responsible for safe. I come and draw my electronic media in the morning. I bring it back by the end of the day. You know what was in the safe, what was withdrawn, what was put back, and so you keep track on a transactional basis, and at periodic intervals do a complete inventory. Well, instead of having hundreds of locations, you now have 20 with a staff that's concentrated, that's professional, that has a career path doing that, and a lot less conflict
isn't that
of
where
interest.
there were people that would take off for lunch and kind of leave it unattended and were asleep or whatever? I mean, wasn't that where that problem existed?
Well, that wasn't our lab. We didn't have guards, for example, that were asleep. But what we did have is we did have people who were custodians. In other words, in the old system, if you were a scientist, you had your own safe with your own classified media in it.
I see.
And that was spread all over the laboratory. And there was a collateral duty classified material custodian that would come by every once in a while and inventory your safe to make sure everything was okay. So what we've done now is that's been done away with. You don't keep your own classified material anymore. It's in the library. When you come to work, you stop by the library, you draw it if you need to use it that day, and if you don't need to use it, it stays in the library, and it's not distributed anymore. It's concentrated.
Is there do they have to turn in their media before they're allowed out the door?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, some areas you'll find people walking around with chains around their neck with a big orange card on it. It's called the M card or the moron card. It's to remind you that you have drawn classified material, and until that's off, you can't go home. You know, we're taking very direct measures to make sure that people are reminded of their responsibilities. And frankly, if you try to go home and the custodian, you know, the custodian can't go home until it's all back. And if they see you heading for the door, they'll say, wait a minute. You know, somebody will go back that night and look for the material.
All right. Do you feel like you have the buy-in of the rank and file of those 12,000?
I think that there has been a great deal of consternation at the laboratory. There are people who have felt that what we've gone through has not been necessary. It's fallen to me to take the message, the collective message of you all and others to the laboratory. They have not been happy, and I believe a minority in the laboratory have not been happy with that and have been very vocal.
Why?
But I think the majority.
What do they say? What's their...
Well, there are people who think that the safety was just doing fine, and we didn't need to have a shutdown for safety. That in fact, that you know, that this is a burden on science, and that our science will suffer. And I don't believe that, and I think the majority of the workers and the scientists at Los Alamos don't believe that. But I think that morale-wise, we took the laboratory down to a very low level in terms of employee morale, and I think the combination of the shutdown and the suspension of operations and the 1-2 punch of that in the contract competition has caused a great deal of personal unease on the part of many, many employees.
So is that resulting in them buying into the improved security?
I think that the pressure that the laboratory has been under with the impending competition and the issues associated with first business and now safety and security has caused the kind of disquiet that has allowed me to implement a lot of change probably more rapidly than would otherwise be the case.
During this shutdown, were you able to identify kind of the groups or individuals who just seem really reluctant to adopt these increased safety and security improvements?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, as part of the restart process, I asked every supervisor to interview their employees at the next level down and to make judgments about the capability of the employee, the level of training, and their willingness to supervise, or if they were supervisors, or to conduct operations in that way. And if it looked like there was a disconnect, in many cases we got employees additional training. In some cases we actually moved employees, changed them in there to more suitable roles if they appeared that they were not able to conduct business in the way that needed to be done.
Of the people that you dismissed, have you kept track of what happened to them? Do they reappear somewhere in the government?
I have not personally kept track of
jobs?
them. There were a mix. There were some very high-level employees and some very low-level employees. I do not know. I don't personally know where they've reappeared. They certainly aren't working on our staff.
Okay. I don't believe I have any more questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Walden. Well, that concludes the testimony of Dr. Nanos. We appreciate
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
Could I ask a question or two, if I may?
Yes, sir.
I finished my statement by saying, you should at least get a hold of Mr. Brown and mail him a copy. But the more I sit here and listen to this testimony today, I would really hope you would call him in and sit down, or find a half hour to an hour and go through this. You're telling us you want to make the lab safe. Mr. Brown here in his paper is saying he wants to make the lab safe. I think you're on the same. The goal is the same. I hope you guys can work together and work it out. You said you had a dispute or two with one of the things he said, but I think it would be in everyone's best interest. There's no doubt in our minds you're trying to do the best you can. Yes, so with Mr. Brown, and I would hope you would do that. And the other thing that bothers me a little bit, Mr. Brown is now sort of considered a whistleblower, so he comes underneath the Government Accountability Project, protections of whistleblowers. Why would Mr. Brown have to turn into a whistleblower and go underneath the Government Accountability Project if he's your auditor and he's trying to bring out deficiencies? It seems to me you would not want him to go under whistleblower, but rather work with you to help you out.
Sir, I don't consider him a whistleblower. I think he has self-selected himself as a whistleblower. We don't consider him a whistleblower. He's still employed. He's still doing audits. In other words, we've taken what he said seriously. We haven't retaliated against him in any way, and he's still a valued employee. So he's being cast. I'm puzzled by why he's being cast in this position of whistleblower. I mean, usually it's if you're a whistleblower, you're a whistleblower because you're either being retaliated against or people aren't taking your legitimate concerns seriously. And I don't think that's true. And either of those things is true in this case.
Well, the Brown letter, the letter at least, is on the GAP website, the Government Accountability Project. That's why I called him a whistleblower.
Yes, sir.
Why would his letter be on the act that protects whistleblowers if he's not a whistleblower? That's why I used the word. So
maybe he had some fear of that eventually being the case, but it certainly is not anything that's there's no action on our part that I know of. One of the things that when I took over at the laboratory, if you remember 2 years ago, there were lots of claims of retribution.
Right.
And so I have been screening all things that have come up, anonymous or otherwise, that indicate that there's something wrong or there's retribution going on, and I run down and investigate every last one of those. So we're making sure that the communications are as open as possible in the laboratory.
Right, and I believe in your previous testimony you even indicated you have an open door policy if someone wants to come in.
Yes, sir.
call it whistleblower, call it whatever, who has some concern. So that's why we were a little concerned there. So I take it from your answers, and you'll sit down with Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir. I'd be glad to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Nanos, thank you. And this time we'll have our third panel, which consists of one witness, and that's Mrs. Danielle Bryan, who is the Executive Director with the Project on Government Oversight. And Mrs. Bryan, we welcome you. We look forward to your testimony. And as you know, the custom of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, you are entitled to have an attorney if you want one. And if you don't, if you would stand, I would like to swear you in at this time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bryan. You're now sworn in, and if you would give us your opening statement.
Thank you very much for asking me to testify today, Chairman. Last year, we testified that we were cautiously optimistic that then Secretary Abraham's initiatives would be implemented. As it turns out, our caution was well placed. The major problem is that the former Secretary failed to establish timely deadlines for their implementation, and as a result, many of these initiatives have now stalled. To get back on track, we believe Secretary Bodman needs to set strict deadlines and needs to assign trusted staff to constantly follow up on their progress. Security experts' greatest fear is very distinct. A terrorist group successfully reaching its target at one of these facilities and with an extraordinarily short time frame uses the highly enriched uranium to create an improvised nuclear bomb on site, known as an improvised nuclear device, or an IND. It only takes a critical mass of HEU, which is about 100 pounds, to create an IND. To put this in perspective, one site alone stores about 400 metric tons of HEU. Why should we care about this? According to the Department of Homeland Security, this is exactly what worries them. The detonation of a 10-kiloton nuclear bomb would destroy everything within half a mile and contaminate 3,000 square miles of land. The nuclear weapons complex creates these Homeland Security vulnerabilities right here at home. By far, the most successful Abraham initiative was the re-examination of the design basis threat. Under the new DBT, security forces will be required to repel more than 3 times the number of attackers than they were required to protect against prior to 9/11. But they will not be fully implemented until 2008, which I want to remind you is 7 years after 9/11. I will just focus comments on the initiatives that we believe require the committee's immediate intervention for the sake of brevity. With regards to TA-18, as we know, TA-18 is scheduled to be de-inventoried of weapons-grade nuclear materials by the end of September 2005. But currently, LANL is actually pushing to continue activities at TA-18, and I understand actually that Ambassador Brooks didn't have the opportunity to get briefed yet from the lab because he was in England, but these additional experiments are going to postpone the move for at least another 6 months. And so POGO has been told that despite promises from the lab that they will meet the schedule, a choice is going to have to be made. Either these experiments will continue and they won't meet the deadline even by the end of the year, or they'll have to pause in conducting these experiments and be able to move the materials to the Nevada test site on schedule. With regards to the initiative to review the necessity of maintaining Lawrence Livermore's special nuclear materials, this has really stalled completely. I think I know why. Just 1 month prior to Secretary Abraham's speech, the NNSA Director Brooks testified before another House committee that he opposed suggestions of de-inventorying Livermore, and in fact, the NNSA has proposed doubling Livermore's plutonium. I understood from the testimony this morning that this particular initiative was combined with a larger initiative of looking in general at consolidation in the complex. But Secretary Abraham in his speech singled out Livermore as worthy of particular notice, and I think it was with very good reason. Roughly 7 million people live within 50-mile radius of the Livermore lab. Many residential homes now exist across the street from the lab's fence line, and new townhouses with mini vineyards are being built along the edge of the fence line. These homes sit only 800 yards from the superblock, which houses the lab's plutonium. If I could direct the Congress to the photograph, the first photograph at the end of my testimony, which is from Livermore's website. And you'll see that Livermore Lab is actually a mile across, and so you get a sense then of the distance. These are all houses now. Many of you live in areas which are getting overdeveloped. I live in Loudoun County, which is the fastest growing area. So this is the kind of thing that happens. But this is really unique in the complex, what's happening at Livermore, to have, and these are $600,000 houses, within 800 yards of the plutonium. So we're recommending that particular focus be placed on Livermore and that special nuclear materials be removed from there. With regards to the highly enriched uranium materials facility at Y-12, the department is currently breaking ground for an above-ground building, as we heard earlier, to store Y-12's hundreds of tons of HEU. But the Department of Energy's Inspector General has criticized this design and cost of this new building, concluding that it will cost more and be less secure than the original plan for the bermed, partially underground facility. I direct you to the other two photos that I've provided to the Congressman. The first photo is of the Nevada Test Site's device assembly facility. This is a bermed design where you see that there's only one side that has to be protected. Everything else is underground. In comparison, the current design for the facility at Y-12 has all these sides. You've got the roof and the four sides, and actually with the design there's more than four sides. Now, it was ultimately Sandia's approval of this design that persuaded the Department of Energy headquarters to give the green light for this design of above-ground building. But POGO has learned that Sandia never compared this design to an underground design. And I understand from the testimony to the Congresswoman from Tennessee who was asking the questions, there's no reason for a 2-year delay if there's a change decision that maybe it should be underground. The government already has the design. Originally, there was already a design for an underground facility at Y-12. It already exists. So we would recommend that the committee suggest to DOE that they stop, because they're actually broken ground for this above-ground facility, and at least have Sandia compare that design to the security of an underground facility. Former Secretary Abraham also proposed the downblending of 100 additional metric tons of Y-12 surplus HEU. We believe this move is essential so that these materials no longer create an unnecessarily Homeland Security vulnerability, and will, very importantly, significantly help in reducing the enormous costs associated with protecting these materials at the new design basis threat. It appears, though, that DOE does not have the stomach to live up to its promises. The U.S. has only currently downblended 34 of the 174 metric tons that have already been declared excess. The remaining downblending is not scheduled for completion until 2016 or beyond. So we believe the DOE should both dramatically speed up the current downblending schedule and affirm former Secretary Abraham's initiative of increasing the amount of HEU declared excess by another 100 metric tons. With regards to Secretary Abraham's encouraging of consolidating nuclear materials, I understand that this study is just beginning to get underway, 9 months after the initiative was assigned to NNSA. My organization, POGO, is in its final stages of preparing a report with recommendations of how to shrink the number of facilities across the country that house special nuclear materials from 13 sites to 7, at a cost savings of nearly $3 billion over 3 years. In conclusion, I would be remiss if I'd not report to the committee that while not a part of former Secretary Abraham's initiatives, the treatment of whistleblowers throughout the complex remains abysmal. And I have to, particularly given Dr. Nanos' comments, make the point of retaliation really remains the norm and not the exception. In addition to Dr. Brown, another case in point is that of Tommy Hook and Chuck Montano, who have both worked at Los Alamos for decades. After the committee's 3 hearings on financial fraud at Los Alamos, the University of California was telling the public that all of those issues were resolved, while at the same time retaliating against these two men who knew otherwise. Hook and Montano were responsible for providing audit support for UC and uncovering ongoing irregularities and outright misconduct amounting to millions of taxpayer dollars. Their audit reports were withheld from the Department of Energy. Their treatment, their work was taken away from them. They were given no work for 9 months and are now being handed menial assignments. Even the head of the Los Alamos site office tried to intervene on behalf of Tommy Hook, only to be rebuffed by an arrogant University of California. Under the current system, DOE contractors have no incentive to treat whistleblowers well, as all their legal fees are reimbursed by the federal government. In conclusion, the Department of Energy does not need new offices, it does not need new commissions, it does not need new studies. The DOE needs to follow through on its existing commitments. I believe the committee should remain apprised of SSA Director Podolsky's important ongoing work, but even with the strongest leadership from the Secretary's office, the only way these initiatives will be enacted is with your continued vigilance. DOE's history has shown that without pressure from Congress, and in particular this subcommittee, these initiatives will fail. And I'd just like to draw your attention, there was one of my staff people was doing research and found a front page New York Times story from 1984 about a hearing in this subcommittee. And if you could indulge me, the first 2 sentences of this article were, "The government has put into effect a sweeping new program to improve the security of federal facilities where nuclear warheads are designed and made. The program has come about because of a new perception of the threat of terrorism and because congressional investigations have disclosed serious lapses of nuclear security." So I don't think your work's going to end anytime soon.
Well, thank you, Ms. Bryan, for reminding us of that. And would you please explain to me the project on government oversight? How old is the project on government oversight, and how is it funded, and so forth?
We were created in 1981. At the time, we were actually the project on military procurement, working with people inside the Pentagon who were concerned about wasted money as well as weapons that weren't working adequately. We expanded our focus and changed our name in 1990 to the Project on Government Oversight. We work with whistleblowers and other people inside the system who work with us on an unclassified basis to get us information that needs to get out to improve the way the federal government operates. We take no money from the government, no money from corporations, and no money from unions.
And you have an expertise in nuclear security, I
No,
take it?
actually, I'm a good government person who, at this point, has been working on this issue for 5 years, and so I feel I've developed it over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in your testimony, you made a reference to Mr. Brown. Do you feel like that Mr. Brown was retaliated against by the University of California?
I know that my colleagues at the Government Accountability Project who are working on his case are very strongly feel that way. I must say that I'm not as familiar with the details of his case.
You also made the comment in here that there is an insular environment in which people coming into the DOE, and particularly the National Nuclear Security Administration, bring with them their biases in favor of the status quo. Now, why do you make a statement like that?
Well, if you look at the people who will leave the NNSA, you see them showing up at the labs, and then you see people leaving the labs and show up at NNSA. It's not unique. I mean, of course that happens around the government, but I've really never seen it as regularly as I've seen it with this particular universe.
And you made the comment also that it is the normal practice that the government will pay legal fees for the contractor in the event of a whistleblower lawsuit. Is that correct?
It is in the case of Department of Energy contractors. That is not the case across the government. It's unique to the Department of Energy, and there have been some legislative initiatives to change that, which I would encourage further consideration and passage. It just creates a terrible incentive.
Right. And it is my understanding that in the energy bill, which this committee will be taking up soon, that we're going to try to change that.
I think that would just really change the dynamic for whistleblowers.
Right. Well, I genuinely appreciate your being with us this morning, and we've certainly read your testimony. And at this time, I will
recognize Mr. Stupak for any questions he might have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for testifying. Mr. Brown, that we have spoken of, have you seen his paper, 22 pages?
I have not. I'm sorry.
Do you know him at all from his work at the labs?
I do know we had brief conversations with him. He was already working with the Government Accountability Project,
Right.
and I felt he was in good hands. And so all of our organizations are short-staffed, so we thought, well, if he's got good people working with him, we have other people we need to help.
I understand. I've asked the other witnesses, and it's fair to ask you, what do you feel are the most important issues that we really need to address right now? I mean, you mentioned TA-18 and how that's been delayed. It was supposed to be done in 2004. Now it's going to be 2008. But is that the most pressing thing you see, or?
Clearly, that was the site that we have focused most attention on over the last few years. I think that we're coming to closure on that one. I mean, it's taken, as I think someone mentioned, perhaps it was you, it was actually Secretary Abraham that began this many years ago trying to, Secretary Richardson trying to get that place closed. I think, honestly, the most important thing now is for there to be two things. One is the consolidation review. There needs to really be consideration of why there are still 13 sites. Even assuming TA-18 closing and Sandia in far too long, from our opinion, closing, you still have a number of sites out there that really shouldn't continue to house these nuclear materials. And so shrinking the complex will help to address the extraordinary cost it will cause, that is being caused by the increase in the design basis threat. The other part of that, I think, that is critical is really a move to downblend some of these, the HEU. That's just, it stalled that initiative again, and that will help to reduce, again, the cost to store this.
From your testimony, I get the impression that whether it was Secretary Richardson or Secretary Abraham, they both had some good suggestions. Those suggestions went out to the labs and just sort of never went anywhere. Is that a fair way of saying it?
I think, and part of that is what you asked, actually, the other congressman asked about earlier, which is this revolving door, because you've got the people who are at headquarters who are all coming from the labs who don't want this change. Every lab wants to keep all the materials there. I mean, there's a real, Livermore does not want to give up their materials. And so unless you have some new ideas and people who aren't beholden to the old system, that's why we're going to keep seeing this pushback.
Well, you said that this Congress, this committee, subcommittee in particular, should keep on this to make sure that that reforms take place, and whether it's consolidation or TA-18. More than this committee, isn't that really lies with Department of Energy? Isn't it really their responsibility?
Well, of course it's their responsibility to provide the leadership, but as you see, I mean, Secretary Abraham laid out, this is what I want to have done. I've learned over time that a secretary, it seems extraordinary to say this, but a secretary of a department doesn't necessarily have the power to make his department do what they don't want to do. And they typically have a shorter time in office than members of Congress. And I think the bureaucracies just wait out the political appointee.
We feel that way too at times. TA-18, do you believe that move could be expedited before 2008? Do you think that could be done by the end of 2006 at the most?
Well, the schedule is actually currently for the end of FY 2005, and my understanding.
But they're just moving it to another building.
Oh, to TA-55. Yes. Correct. Right.
And then they're supposed to go up to Nevada with it.
Right.
And they said there's shipping things, and you got to handle it. I would think if you're shipping it from TA-18 to building number 55, and then you're going to ship it to Nevada, I mean, you're shipping it, packaging, shipping it twice. You can really, I'm just trying to figure out this delay, because as I said earlier in my testimony, not testimony, I'm sorry, but my statements, it's been 10 years we've been talking about TA-18.
That's
right. I've been on this committee 10 years.
I am actually quite worried about the plans to keep the stuff at TA-55, because it feels to me like it's really Los Alamos' efforts to keep the stuff on site and hope people will start forgetting about TA-18 and the plans to move it, as tends to happen, and then they'll be able to maintain the stuff there. I don't really understand, I still don't understand why all the facilities feel almost an emotional attachment to keeping the materials. They just can't say, you know, let's go move it somewhere else that's more secure.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Dr. Burgess? Well, I was shocked. No more questions, but
No, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
okay. Ms. Bryan, thank you so much for your testimony and for taking the time to be with us. As I stated earlier, we're going to go in recess now, and we're going to reconvene in room 2218 for a closed session. And it is now 1 o'clock, so I think we'll reconvene in room 2218 at 1:15. That'll give people just about 9 or 10 minutes. So thank you very much. With that, we'll recess, and then we'll reconvene.
Up next, a Pentagon town hall meeting with Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. And then a Defense Department briefing on national defense strategy. And after that, a look at telecommunications issues, including the new chairman of the FCC. Tomorrow on Washington Journal, Robert Manning, author of Credit Card Nation, on proposed changes in the bankruptcy laws. Doug Letterman, editor of Inside Higher Ed, talks about student aid and college loans. And Kabad Talabani, the U.S. representative for the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan,